Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. So I listened to the Wes Huff interview on Joe Rogan today, and so I thought I would offer a critique of this interview. So I'm going to go through the whole entire thing, which is probably going to take, it's going to be a project. Now, obviously, Joe Rogan, he's not a Christian. He is, going to be swearing and all that. So people with sensitive ears, just be aware of that. And I'm not going to talk about that too much more because I've got it in the title, I've got it on the thumbnail, and when you're around non-Christians, that's just what happens. And so, but we're going to look at some of the key points here, and we're going to look at some of the good things that Wes said, some of the controversial things he said, some of the things he didn't say. And we're also going to look at textual criticism because when it comes to Christianity, I would agree with a lot of what Wes believes. But when it comes to the Bible and where we find the Bible, we're on opposite sides in a sense where Christianity is divided. Christians, they're divided on this issue. Churches have been divided on this issue for 50, 100 years now, mostly about 50 years. This whole issue sort of has come around since the introduction of new modern Bible versions. And so that's usually my forte. So I'm going to look at some things to do with that. But we also want to look at some of the things that Joe Rogan said, and also that Wes Huff brought up, to do with science, religion. There were a few places where I felt like he could have hit a home run with a few things to do with the concept of young earth creationism. But I think I'll share those thoughts as we go through, because sometimes when you are talking to someone who has that type of mindset, you can get tangled in the weeds there. But I guess there were a few opportunities missed, I felt, to just say, hey, look, this is my exact position on this. And it made me question, what is Wes Huff's exact position? Because sometimes I'll be debating with someone, like, say, for example, James Snap Jr., and he doesn't believe in a global flood. And it's like, oh, that's different. I thought you would have, And I guess usually we think that people have the same, presuppositions and same doctrine as us when we're debating them. And sometimes it's only in a debate or in an interview that a little bit of pressure is put on, or an opportunity is there, and you see different shades of people. So I'll just start going through the video. I'll let you know what I thought of the interview. And I think that it was a very important interview. And I don't think a lot of Christians understand the gravity of how huge this is. I mean, Joe Rogan I think he's number 1 on Spotify for podcasts, which is huge. He's one of the most popular podcasters in the world. And so having people even just expressing, the basic gospel on this platform is a huge thing. And so the ramifications of that are, okay, Wes Huff is going to come under scrutiny from everyone, because all of a sudden he's saying things on our behalf because we're Christians. He's on this platform, and whether he wanted it to go that big or whatever, all of a sudden he's now telling people about scripture. He's telling people about creation issues. He's going to be talking about science, and people are going to put him under the microscope. And especially atheists are going to come and say, hey, Wes, what about this? What about that? And they're going to critique him specifically because he has taken down Billy Carson. And, some of these guys, I've dealt with a lot of these guys online for years and years, and they can be really toxic. And so I expect a lot of backlash, a lot of little videos, and the Myth Vision guys pretty much straight away were all over, Wes, saying, what about this? What about that? And the thing is, with my interactions with Wes just on the Textus Receptus King James issues, there are some places where he is making statements which aren't that great. And so I'll actually just go to the Wes Huff website, Wes Huff. Now, one of the issues with what he just recently put on his website. Now, I'll try and find this before I throw it up there and make you dizzy going around with everything. But I think it was the infographics, or maybe it's the resources, blogs and articles. Yes, so this one here. So he's just put this up January the 6th. The most famous story from the Bible that's not actually in the Bible. So this is the problem. He's turning around and putting these up. So this is one of the first things that people are going to see. He's saying, okay, everyone go to Wes Huff. And we're thinking, okay, well, that's great. People are going to learn about Christianity. This is one of the first articles that comes up. They're basically saying that the 12 verses in from John chapter 7 through to John chapter 8, verse 12, these 12 verses are removed, or verse 11, sorry. I was looking at that. And it says, if you look at your modern translation of the Bible, you'll notice that at the end of John 7, the text is often sectioned out or bracketed off with a citation note that reads something to the effect of, the earliest manuscripts and many other ancient witnesses do not have John 7:53 to 8:11. So that's a section from the NIV Bible. So already, if you've grabbed a modern Bible, you have these type of footnotes, and you're like, oh, and it casts doubt upon these verses. I listen to people all the time, from people from academia right down to just laymen on the street, or sometimes, some of my friends have podcasts and things. Some of them have 100,000 followers, and they're daily doing things. But when it comes to this issue, they'll just say, oh, this was a butterfly text that was just floating around and landed, here, and that's Dan Wallace's story. He actually came up with this whole concept of, his favorite story, favorite Bible story that's not actually in the Bible, sort of thing. And so as we look down, it says, part of the trickiness of the conversation regarding this text, which records the story of the woman caught in adultery, is that it's not found in any of the earliest Greek texts in the manuscript tradition. Well, that's not actually true. What was happening was the early church, they were using some of these manuscripts as a lectern cycle. So like a lectionary. So what you would find is people would read through these stories, the Feast of Pentecost. They were going through these, and when you got a story of a woman caught in adultery, it's quite a controversial story. A lot of people love this story, even in the Passion of the Christ. It has nothing to do with the Jesus dying on the cross, but here he is giving people say that he forgave the lady. He actually couldn't even condemn her according to the law. So there's quite a lot of controversy over that, where a lot of people say, oh, Jesus just forgave her. Well, he actually said to stone her. He said he was without sin, cast the first stone. So he actually said to stone her. So according to the law, if you had 2 or 3 witnesses, you could do that. So obviously these guys, it was a bit of a scam. It says they were testing him. And so this whole thing was probably not real or something like that. Something was going on. And anyway, so a lot of people just think, oh, Jesus forgave. He actually, broke the law and just forgave her and all this sort of stuff. No, if there were witnesses there, she would have been stoned. And but they were doing that sort of stuff because the Romans wanted to put everyone to death. And so, the Jews just doing whatever they wanted, they would get in trouble. So they're trying to stir up problems for Jesus. So you got to understand all the background to this. But at the end of the day, what the early church was doing was getting this story and going, look, it's a little bit of a different story. Let's just put it to the end of the gospel. Or sometimes what you'll find in later manuscripts, because it appears in 85% of the manuscripts. And so some of the earlier ones don't have it, but then we're looking at, okay, are these earlier ones? And so I'm actually convinced that there's going to be a huge, massive, probably a controversy that's going to be one of the biggest ones in academia for maybe 50 years. I think with Codex Vaticanus just being tested, I think that they've actually tested the original inks. And when I read through the article that just came out, that Nehemiah Gordon was in the Vatican testing the inks of Vaticanus, I think it's dated to like the 11th and 12th century. And I don't know how we can get around that. They've put the amount of metal that's in the text up online for everyone to see. And when you look at it, you're like, this seems like it's dated to about the 11th or 12th century. So it's going to be really interesting to see the ramifications of this. Anyway, a lot of people are pushing for Sinaiticus to get tested. So it's these type of manuscripts that don't have, the story. Now there are several others that don't, but people like Maurice Robinson, now he's not a King James only guy or a Textus Receptus guy. He's a majority text guy. Now he's written a lot on this, and he says that all they were doing was grabbing this and putting it into a different section of the Bible because they didn't want to read it on that same day. It's a bit like if you were reading the Christmas narrative and you're reading about the wise man and all that. You don't really want a story like the woman with the issue of blood or something. You don't want a big serious thing to be just right there. You want to maybe talk about that later. So that's what they were doing here. They were grabbing this story and saying, look, let's talk about it later. And what actually happened in the lectern cycle, I've got to watch that. I'm not saying lectern. I'm saying lectionary cycle. They were putting it in October because that's when they read these. So there is a very valid reason why it was taken off. And some of these manuscripts where they're saying, it doesn't appear in Codex Alexandrinus. Well, what they were often doing was getting this story and just putting it at the back of the book of John. But then sometimes we don't have the back of the book of John. So it's, people are just like, well, it's not in there. And so, well, we don't have the whole manuscript. So how do you know it's not at the end? And also there are, I think it actually is Codex Alexandrinus where I think there's like 3 chapters missing and it includes this whole story. So people have just sort of surmised, like, we think it's missing. We've added up the spaces and everything, and we're pretty sure that it's gone. Where other people who say it should be in there, and I'm not talking about KJV people or TR people from the majority text crowd are saying, no, we've worked out the size of these letters and we've gone through and we think it is actually in there. So when you read through something like this, it's just, imagine you just become a new Christian and then this is thrown in your face. So this is the problem with, and this is what I've been saying all the way through with my critique of Wes Huff, is kudos to him for doing lots of good things, but this whole issue of textual criticism, he's basically just sort of parroting stuff that's been said for the last 20 years by James White, Dan Wallace, and other people, and it's not helpful. This is like a poison that when people get into this mode, they start doubting the Bible because they will get the NIV and the story will be in there, and then they read it and go, well, actually, those aren't the words of the Bible. When you ask these apologists and these scholars, people in academia, well, where did this story come from? They say, well, Jesus said the story. And you're like, okay, well, doesn't that sort of make it scripture? Oh, no, it was like a story that he actually said, and it's all true, but it was added in later. And just because they got these manuscripts that scribes went, I'm going to put that at the end, it doesn't mean that is a reflection of what happened in the original. So this is usually the problem. People like Bruce Metzger, instead of admitting that some of these manuscripts have problems and holes and they're faulty, he goes, well, the original Bible had these problems. And it's a huge jump. So anyway, we're going to touch on all that, but I thought I'd just jump into this article here. So it says, the first surviving manuscript to contain the pericope is the 4th, 5th century Latin Greek diaglot Codex Bezae. So this is basically, it's got Latin on one side, it's got Greek on the other. It has the story of the woman caught in adultery. This is named after Theodore Beza. Theodore Beza, he, if you get his 1598 edition of these Greek and Latin texts, it's basically exactly the same as the King James, except for about 20 places. He basically formulated the text underlying the King James, and he had access to this manuscript. And when he donated it to, I think it was the Cambridge Library, he said, "Look, it's an interesting manuscript, but I wouldn't translate from it because it's got some pretty serious problems." And that's what I say with Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus. These manuscripts are problem manuscripts. I mean, we can't just assume that everything's good. There's between 5,200 and 5,500 manuscripts, however many there are. And some of these are good copies. Some of them are lousy. And some of them are, like this one here, is recognized by everyone, by Wes Huff, by myself, by Stephen Boyce, by James White, as being a lousy manuscript. Interesting, old, but lousy. And that's the way that I see Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and many other people see them too. They're interesting, and perhaps they're old, but they're just lousy manuscripts. And so they got strange and bizarre readings in them. So anyway, I'll keep going here. So I won't read these little details, but it just says the end of John 21 and the gospel as a whole is here. So that's in Greek, just saying this is the end of the gospel. And this is the woman caught in adultery. So this is a 12th century manuscript. So this is what was happening at times. They were putting this story at the end. In a few important medieval manuscripts that contain the story, like the 12th century minuscule one, the story is placed after the Gospel of John is finished. At the end of John 7 in minuscule 1, we find a long explanatory note stating that the story is not found in most manuscripts, nor mentioned by early Christians, John Chrysostom, Cyril of Alexandria, Theodore of Mopsuestia, and the rest. Okay, so that looks like it's one big sentence, but he needs a full stop there, I think. It says, at the end of John 7, in minuscule 1, we find a long explanatory note stating that the story is not found in most manuscripts. I'm not sure if he's saying that there's a story that it's not in these either. Okay, so, there's 85% of the manuscripts have it. So it is in the majority, 15% don't. But there are notes saying that this is part of a lectionary cycle, and probably stemming from around the time of John Chrysostom. And some of these marginal dots and things like that, Bruce Metzger thought they were deletion dots, but they're actually pointing to this being at the end of the manuscript. So it says here, the scribe of Codex Velta, after John 7:52, wrote the first 7 words of 8:12, but then left the rest of the page blank and resumed writing after leaving 3 additional blank lines on the following page. So what was happening was some people were like, look, we want it back in there, because they'd removed it because of the lectionary cycle, which they were sort of reading through, and when they got to this point in scripture, it's like, okay, Bob, it's your turn to read this. And they'd already removed that whole woman caught in adultery thing, because it was quite a scandalous story where, who was it? Was it, I can't remember, might have actually been Jerome, who said that they were taking this out because some people were using this as an excuse for adultery, like God will just forgive, sort of thing. So I guess there were some communities that were like, look, we have to deal with this whole story by itself in this is radioactive. Let's just put it at the end so we can chat about it when we want to chat about it. At the moment, we just want to focus on the Feast of Pentecost, and that's what we want to focus on. And so that's why they were doing it. And that's pretty well accepted. Like in the TR communities, I think everyone would think that. In the majority text communities, I would say that pretty much everyone thinks that. It's only in the critical text communities where, people like Dan Wallace are saying this was a floating butterfly text. No, they wrote their texts out according to how it was structured in their churches. It was very practical. I mean, sometimes we have Bibles that are prophecy study Bibles, and they mix up all the readings, or, it's not all in, chronological order. And so, but these guys are looking at that and going, oh, it's not in chronological order, or, they don't have the end of the manuscript. Like we just saw, some of these documents have it at the end. How do you know it wasn't on the end? So they just go, well, that's a point for us. It's not in there, sort of thing. This has led most experts on this issue to conclude that the story is not original to John's Gospel and was instead a later interpolation. It says here, the vast majority of later manuscripts contain the story, and based upon that, it is still part of the Byzantine liturgy and accepted as scripture by the Greek Orthodox Church. Well, the Byzantine text is basically the foundation for the Textus Receptus. We have 3 in the closed class of witnesses. We follow the Byzantine. We look at the Latin, because the Latin was hugely copied, and it has lots of different variants. And so people can look at the Latin to see how that has been translated. And basically the Greek is primary. You have the Greek, you have the Latin, which polishes the Greek corrects the Latin, and then we have the writings of the early church that guide that entire process. So this is the type of thing that Erasmus and Stephanus and Beza were doing. And then you can go outside of the closed class of witnesses to other languages like Syriac and Armenian and things like that. So that's outside of those 3 that are the pillars for the Textus Receptus. It says here, the story of the woman caught in adultery is likewise included in the Latin Vulgate and therefore utilized by the Roman Catholic Church. So, yes, the Latin Vulgate, yes, that was used by the Roman Catholic Church, but also the Latin was just used pretty much everywhere. And so, but anyway, we'll just keep moving. Virtually all Protestant Bibles, in brackets that I'm aware of, at least, close bracket, contain the passage, albeit with some sort of indication of differentiation within the text. So basically they've got it there, but they have, double brackets. And it has here, the earliest manuscripts do not include this. Now, that's the ESV Bible. So this is the problem. You're telling, we tell people, trust in the Bible. The words of the Bible will change your life and all the rest of it. And they go to the bookshop and they get this ESV and it's like, oh, here's 12 verses that apparently shouldn't even be in there. And you get ranging from new Christians all the way up to, a Dan Wallace type of guy. They will just parrot, no, these aren't the words of God. It's like, well, what is it then? Is it apocryphal? Is it Gnostic? But then this is the strangest thing. Like, say with the last 12 verses of Mark, there's another 12 verses they want to delete. There's 2,900 less words in the Greek text that underlies the modern Bibles than the Textus Receptus. There's 8,000 changes. It's a lot. So it's a huge issue. But in the last 12 verses of Mark, there's only 2 manuscripts that don't have those 12 verses, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And I think very soon Vaticanus is going to get proven to be much later than it really is. And that's I think that's on the cards. I'm almost certain that that's going to happen. And so people grab this Bible and they're like, well, what about the last 12 verses of Mark? James White, we'll ring him up. He's an expert. And he says they're Gnostic. Those words are from Gnostics. And it's like, well, okay. And then you ask Peter Gurry, ring him up, the Text and Canon Institute, I think it is, in Phoenix, and he'll say they're apocryphal. So it's like having, when some of these Catholic Bibles, they have like Daniel chapter 12, and it's like, oh, hang on, chapter 13, 14, and 15. That's weird. Got these extra chapters. That's what they think this is. But they're in their Bibles. They're still in there. Why? They're double bracketed in the Nestle Alarm text. Why don't they delete them? And so this is the thing, that they don't delete them. So they're in their Bible. So people are walking around with their new modern Bible. Mark Ward will just convince them, hey, there's no changes. It's just updated words. And so you don't know that they're taking out, heaps of verses, they're removing so many words, and also keeping some things in and just placing doubt over them. And so that's why I always say to people, look, read the King James. If you struggle reading the King James, there are updates. I've worked on one, KJV 2023. At least, like, I would say that people shouldn't even go into these critical text Bibles. I would say they'll at least, read like the New King James. If you struggle reading the King James, that should just be like, okay, well, that's the worst one I'm going to go to. Understanding that the King James is a superior document. It's based upon superior manuscripts, with superior translators, with superior theology, and we could go through all that, but I'll keep moving on here. And so, amazingly, like, who wrote this? It's quite amazing that the last 12 verses of Mark are either Gnostic or apocryphal, but this one here, apparently Jesus really did do this and said these words, but it was put in later. How strange is that? Because when you're looking for authenticity and canonicity, you're like, well, does it go back to an apostle and all this sort of stuff? Well, apparently it does. It goes right back to an original story of Jesus, but they still throw it out. I can't understand it. There's an obsession with the critical text guys with Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. And so it says here, this transparency in modern translation. So they're saying this is a great thing, that we show people where there's these horrible additions. It should encourage us. So, be a bit like Bart Ehrman and just throw 12 verses out and, flush these down the toilet. If you want to believe them, believe them. If you don't, don't. Just choose your own adventure Bible, make it up as you go, sort of thing. But it's encouraging. So this is where, kudos to, Wes Huff for doing everything he's done and talking on the Joe Rogan program. But then he's leading people to this, and this is his most recent article. So I'm not just trudging through his website and just finding some tiny little thing and going, hey, this is wrong. I'm going, okay, what if people go to his blog? Let's go there. This is the first thing they see. It's like, for someone who believes that we have all the words of God, that every word of God is important. The Bible says in Revelation chapter 22, don't add to these words. Don't subtract from these words. It's very clear not to do this. So we should know where these words are. Why would God command us not to do something if we don't know where the words are? If we're thinking, oh, should we add or subtract these 12? I don't know. They're in brackets. Some Bibles say that they're not there. Other Bibles don't say anything. And it's like, okay, do we keep it? Do we throw it out? That's confusion. We as Christians, we can commit that sin of adding and subtracting, like Revelation 22 says. And that inadvertently means we will know where the words of God are. I know where the words of God are. I know if I just went to, John chapter 5, or, and some verse and just deleted it and said that shouldn't be in the Bible, I would be committing a sin, because I know where the words of God are. How can you ever commit that sin if you're like, well, we delete that verse, or the NIV has that verse in, but the NASB doesn't, and the ESV added it in, but then they later on deleted it. And how can you know where the word of God is with all this mess? And so this transparency in modern translation should encourage us. We can pinpoint these additions in the history of the text of the Bible, and today's versions have no qualms sharing that reality. So he's like, well, we're just being completely transparent here. If you've grown up in a church and all the rest of it, and you're just you've already got your Christianity, you're following your parents and following your church and, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, maybe that's enough. But for people like myself who grew up in atheism and thought we came from some sort of baboon, I used to believe that. I used to think, well, why are we bothering with morals when we come from monkeys? Why don't we just behave like a monkey? What's the difference if I give you a biscuit or shoot you in the face? What's the difference? Who cares? There's no morality. We come from monkeys. Monkeys bash each other in the jungle and kill each other. Who cares about anything? I used to say this sort of stuff. I was a full atheist. And I came to Christianity, and the word of God was powerful to me. I came from having a mindset like, so I can relate to someone like Joe Rogan knowing nothing about any of this and coming to Christianity and going, man, these words are so important. And then just having Christians just flippantly like, 12 verses, just get rid of them. Just throw these out, Don't worry, the last 12 verses of mine, they can be in, they can be out. Choose your own adventure Bible. Isn't this fun? And they think it's fun, and they think it's like, like doing a Sudoku puzzle or something. It's an adventure, Any place where there is a serious question concerning the authenticity of a passage, your modern translation will, as we can see with the example of John 7:53 and 8:11, note it for the reader somewhere in the modern version. It's like, I call them doubt-producing footnotes. Now, I understand that if you need to put something in there, that's fine. But a lot of these footnotes are just nothings. Like, say, the Westcott and Hort English text that they brought out, they had a footnote saying where 666 was involved, they had or 616. Now, these guys love to talk about that. 616, because it's controversial. People straight away are like, oh, is that the original reading? And there's so much evidence for 666. Like 616 is just a joke. But why did Westcott and Hort put it as like in a margin? It's just a quirky, strange, bizarre reading. Why would you do that? It's just going to create doubt in people. And you see things like in the Revised Standard Version, they had footnotes where in Matthew chapter 1, when you read down, it says, Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. It actually says Joseph, the father of Jesus. And then they have a footnote saying this is from the Sinaitic manuscript, but it's a Sinaitic Syriac manuscript. It's not even a Greek manuscript. It's just some strange translation. And it's like, man, there's 100,000 New Testament documents out there. There's some pretty silly stuff out there too. And it's like, why have they got that as a footnote? And it actually attacks the virgin birth and says that Joseph was Jesus' dad. So it's important. These footnotes, many times you go through them, and it's like when I first became a Christian, at the church that I was involved with, they read the New King James. And most people just thought it was an update of the Old King James, okay? And so I started reading it, and the first one that I had didn't have any footnotes. It had a few tiny ones here and there, like in Daniel chapter 3, verse 25, where it said, or a son of the gods and things like that. But I ended up getting it like a leather-bound one, proper Bible, and it had all these footnotes. And the New King James has 40,000 footnotes. I think until the Net Bible, it was just unparalleled with how many footnotes they had. And so I started realizing that when I was reading the Bible, it was like my eyes would go from the text to these little notes that had NU, which is the Nestle Alarmed United Bible Society text, or the M for majority text, omits this verse or changes this or does this. And I'm reading through, and a lot of the time I would be encouraged by the word that was being said, but then my eyes would go over to this little marginal note and would say, this verse doesn't belong in there. Oldest manuscripts say that, or I can't remember what the New King James says, but it was producing doubt in me. So I actually went through as I was reading the Bible, and I was crossing these out, because it was almost like I had like a Jehovah's Witness on one ear and the Word of God on the other, and I'm there going, oh man, I've got to shut this voice off. This voice is causing me to doubt what I'm reading. So Yeah, and before I didn't have all these footnotes, and I was believing what was said. And so I went through and actually crossed out the whole entire Bible, all these marginal notes. And people used to go, why are you crossing out things in your Bible? I'm like, oh, these are like notes. I had no idea what they were. Okay. Now, before I became a Christian, someone encouraged me to read the Bible, and they preached to me. Now, I went home. I said, okay, I'm going to read this Bible. Someone had given me like one of those Olympic Bibles, New Testament. I thought, I'm going to read this. And they told me to read the book of James for some reason. And I read the introduction. And it said something about King James. I didn't know who that was. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then I kept flicking through, and I got to Matthew chapter 5, and I started noticing all these notes. And it was saying like, this doesn't appear in these manuscripts or whatever it was saying in that edition at the time. And I thought, these Christians are idiots. They don't even know what's in their Bible. They have no idea what's written in their text. And I just grabbed the thing and just frisbeed it into the corner of the room and just went, what a load of rubbish. So I know what it's like to be an atheist and read one of these Bibles and go, what a joke. Because it's like, we're being honest and we're telling you this and telling you, and it's like they don't know where the words of God are. They're saying 12 verses deleted. Mark chapter 16, 12 verses deleted. 1 John 5:7 deleted. All these there's like 20 other verses just deleted. So he's sort of praising these footnotes. Yeah, sure. If you've grown up in Christian circles and you've got the tradition of going to church and loving the Lord and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. Maybe you can get some of the Bible, verses and scrunch them up, 12 verses and just cross them out and say, well, that doesn't really matter or whatever. But when you're relying on every word, when you've got a mindset where you're skeptical of everything and you're looking at it going, is this really the Bible? Do we really have all the words of God? Is this really true? Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Or have they passed away? And we don't know where they are. And we've got to ring up a scholar somewhere and go, should I delete that? Because they don't even delete them from these Bibles. They delete a lot of stuff, but these 12 verses, they don't delete it. I think the main reason they don't delete it is because so many people will get upset that their favorite stories are just deleted. So I'll keep reading. Despite it almost certainly not being original to the Gospel of John, that does not disqualify it from being a historically authentic Jesus story. Like I said, they say that Jesus said this story. Look how weird is this? But it's not part of the Bible. It's in their Bible. Jesus said it, but it's not part of the Bible. And it's like, okay, that's weird. How do they know that? The traditions that contain the story are very old and have been highly treasured throughout church history, even by those who throughout the centuries who have questioned its biblical authenticity. So it says here, Papyrus 66 nor 75 contain the story. And so that's the thing. You got to look into all these. I can't remember just off the top of my head, which ones they don't have the complete document of. There are some that they claim, it doesn't have a story in it, but it's actually like missing, chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8 or something. And then it starts back in chapter 9 and they're like, see, it's not there. And it's like, you just, there are some very good scholars out there looking at that. So yeah, that's the end of that article. So I just thought I'd show you, that's going to be the first thing that a lot of people go to. That was just put out the other day. Okay, so what's at the 8th here today in Australia? So that's January 6th. So let's get on to the debate, or I always say debate because I'm usually looking at a debate. It's actually more an interview. Got a few guys in the house here. Now, I won't go through and read them, read all these comments. One of the things that I get caught in the weeds in with these videos is reading through absolutely everything. So I'll go through, if there's something of interest, I'll comment on it. And so, but I understand you guys just want to chat, to each other. And so I'll check that out. But let's start this. Okay. Okay, here we go. Unmute. Put it about there.
Check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day. Wes, very nice to meet you.
Joe, pleasure.
So I, like many people, was introduced to you because of the debate that you had with Billy Carson.
Quote unquote.
You know, it's one of those things where it's very unfortunate when people get caught with their pants down. And I'm not an expert in many things, but the things that I am an expert on, you could wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and ask me about those things. And I go, oh, yeah, no.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
Yeah.
I know, you know, like martial arts or comedy. I could tell you, I could give you an expert version of reality. It seems like he does not have that, and he is a wonderful talker, and it's a lot of fun. I like watching his videos. I love all that ancient history stuff, and even the most ridiculous tinfoil hat aspects of ancient. It's fun.
It's entertainment.
But I know that there's a different, like Andrew Schultz and I had a discussion about this. Like he said when he had Billy on the podcast, he said, we're not going to fucking research anything. We're not going to search anything. We're not going to do anything. We'll just let him talk because it's fun.
Yeah.
Andrew's awesome. But when he was on with you, it was quite apparent that you are an actual expert in the Bible and in many religious texts, and that he didn't necessarily have the facts straight. So
Yeah.
what was the fallout of all of that?
Well, it's interesting you say the expert thing, because I literally was asked to do it 24 hours beforehand. So I had like the least amount of preparation going into it. And I was okay with that because I'd listened to Billy Carson. Well, and I listened to the stuff he'd said. So I knew enough about the ways that he'd articulated things about the ancient Near East and the Bible and Christianity to know enough that his level is pretty surface. But the fallout was that not only did he not want us to release the conversation, but then he started throwing out cease and desist letters. And then he started, trying to sue people. So, I mean, I was never worried because I'm a Canadian, and anybody who's tried to sue internationally knows that.
Good luck.
Yeah, right. Yeah. As far as I understand it, he would have had to file a claim in a Canadian court that would have been reviewed to have legal precedence. That he'd have to prove that he could win.
What was his argument?
And so if you don't know what's happened, Wes Huff, he did a debate with Billy Carson. And so if you don't know who Billy Carson is, he's often sort of saying, the crucifixion never happened and this type of thing. It's really low-hanging fruit stuff. Like when, some people, they're online, they're very famous, but they just say the most outlandish things. And you're rolling your eyes going, well, that's pretty ridiculous. And so Wes debated him and just pulled him up on a few things. And it was enough to really destroy the guy. And the guy basically said to Wes, oh, you can't show that program. Threatened to sue him. The moderator of the debate, he came around in the middle of the night and was banging on his door saying, you can't show this. And so that's just drawn more attention to it more than anything. And so if it would have just been a small little thing if that hadn't happened, because, there's plenty of Christians out there online just saying, this atheist is wrong. Look how silly this is and all the rest of it. But, you get 1,000 views or, 20,000 views, whatever you get. But this just blew up. And so it's caused Wes just to be, put right in the spotlight. And obviously, he's come on Joe Rogan's radar. And Billy Carson about 6 months ago was on the Joe Rogan podcast. So, saying all this sort of stuff and sort of proclaiming that he was an expert on all these languages and all the rest of it. So I'll let Wes continue on, but I just thought I'd just get you up to speed if you don't know what they're talking about. And just quickly, someone asked, why does my website say not safe? My website's actually quite old. It's an old, like Wikipedia style website. And sometimes it asks for an SSL certificate. So if you want to put credit card details and stuff like that in there, but I don't sell anything on there. So it's sort of weird. It's one of those things because I run my own server and my own website because it's such a massive website. It's actually hard to get people to work on it who know what they're doing. And so sometimes things like that just happen. And then sometimes, they just go away. So I've had that type of issue for, since I've had the website since 2008. And I really need to update the server and things like that. But at the moment, it is safe to go to, but it's just, it's only if you're putting in your credit card details and things like that. Or if you're worried about someone spying that you've been there, I guess,
Apart from the fact that he was embarrassed that he lost?
Well, yeah, that's not really an argument, right? We've all been there. You're hungover, thinking about all the dumb stuff you did last night and wondering if anybody remembers. Unfortunately, someone does remember.
So he's got a few of these ads, the cash for comment sort of thing. So, yeah, we'll just
remember everything you do online, and they've got receipts. I'm talking about your internet provider and data brokers and every shady marketing company that gets their greedy hands on your private activity. But this year is going to be different. Give your online privacy a fresh start with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is an easy-to-use app that encrypts your online activity and reroutes it through secure servers, keeping your browsing history private from third parties. And it hides your IP address, making it impossible for data brokers to use it to track you. You don't have to be a tech genius to use ExpressVPN, no matter what device you're using. Phone, tablet, online, private. Lets you connect. So forget DryGen. Get 4 extra at expressvpn.com to get 4
desist letter. Yeah, the cease and desist
completely free. Tap the banner to learn more.
Well, the cease and desist letter. Yeah, the cease and desist letter said, I don't want you to use my name or my face in anything going forward, and anything you've used up until this point, you need to remove. And
I think Joe Rogan was actually suing people for that as well, because a lot of people would have Joe Rogan's face and then someone there, because Joe Rogan said some pretty outlandish things about Christianity and history and, lots of different things. He's an alternative sort of guy. And so obviously people are going to pick that to pieces. And because he's so famous, just having his head on a thumbnail, people think, they interviewed this guy, and they click on it. So people use it for clickbait, I guess.
And I was given 24 hours notice to do this.
But if you're a public figure, he's clearly a public figure. Is that even, can you actually say? No,
you can't do it.
So what was does he have a lawyer that wrote this cease and desist? Is he a lawyer?
No. So it's interesting because Mark Menard, who was the guy who hosted this interaction, he sent Mark a handwritten one, and then he eventually gave Mark an official one from his lawyer. So I actually was sent one by his lawyer, which I, screenshotted, posted publicly online, and said, I'm going to ignore this. And then, but he'd sent Mark, who was the podcast host, as far as I'm aware, numerous cease and desists, and Anton, who was the media manager. He'd sent a number of cease and desists.
It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
When you get caught with your pants down, you're supposed to say, I got caught with my pants down.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do. It's the only, especially if you're public, it's very clear that you're incorrect.
Well, the irony of this situation is if he just kind of left it, it probably wouldn't have made anywhere close to the splash that it's made. And we told him that. We said, hey, Barbra Streisand effect is going to happen.
Yeah.
You're a big enough personality that if I make a video and say, hey, I had this conversation, didn't go well for Billy, and Billy doesn't want it released, that's going to start to gain traction sooner or later.
Yeah. It's, the problem is to really delve into these subjects. It takes a tremendous amount of research, years and years and years of research.
And so, Justin quickly says, do you think comedians think Joe is an expert? So, when I've gone through this, I know the question is sort of, a little bit different than the answer that I'm going to give, but I don't think anyone really thinks that Joe's an expert on Christianity. Even the basics of Christianity, I think Joe would sort of struggle with. like trying to explain them. A lot of people are like that. A lot of people, if they're not regularly going to church and thinking about these things, and they're thinking lots of other worldviews, they can just assume things. They can assume that, what things like Billy Carson have said are true. And so I don't think he's an expert on anything when it comes to the Bible. And this whole interview sort of showed that, where I guess it was a tiny bit unfortunate. Some of the conversations sort of ended up in, conspiracy land. But I actually don't listen to Joe Rogan much. I know a lot of people who do, and they'll turn around and say, "Oh, did you listen to the latest Joe Rogan?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, what's he talking about?" Oh, he's talking about MK Ultra and this and then. I'm like, I looked at MK Ultra like 20 years ago, and so I sort of feel like I don't feel the need. I actually listened to his one on where he interviewed RFK, and it was all about vaccinations, and I thought that was gold. And so a guy just said, "You got to listen to this one." So I listened to the whole thing all the way through, but even that, I sort of knew it anyway, so I guess I'm always looking for new information and stuff like that. But yeah, I think he's got an important program. Now, one of the reasons why Joe Rogan is so liked, I mean, he's an MMA fighter. He's the sort of guy who you feel like, if you met him on the street, he would just have a chat to you. He's a very humble guy, but he's not afraid to just look at everything. So he'll have someone on who believes that aliens made us and they're coming back soon or whatever. Then he'll have a biblical creationist on and talk about that sort of thing. Then he'll have Donald Trump on. And so he's just open to just talking about everything. And so, yeah, I like that about him. But, yeah, I don't usually listen to him and tune in. So
you really have to know what you're talking about. Most of us don't.
Well, and especially with languages.
Yes.
Like, we didn't get into it. I hoped to have, in our initial conversation, kind of press him a little bit more on the more overt things he'd said about, like, Greek and Hebrew and Sumerian, because I've studied a number of ancient languages. And when you study the languages, you realize the complexities of these things. And so when someone hasn't and they're making statements that are obviously indicative of someone who hasn't studied them, it's super apparent.
Right.
And so I think it's one thing to be making claims about, say, like Christian history or the Bible. But when you start to get into like linguistics and philology, it gets messy. And if you don't know what you're talking about, it gets really apparent really fast.
So the gentleman who brought the two of you together.
And I would say that's a really good point where, I mean, if you're, obviously I'm doing videos all the time about these issues, talking about Bible translations, different versions, different manuscripts. And eventually you know all the basics, And so, I can usually go in cold and critique, someone from the academy who's talking about, some sort of text or talking against, the Textus Receptus or something like that. And I think that's the thing. It becomes really apparent. It's like when you're an expert on everything. It doesn't mean you're smart at everything. It just means you're smart at one thing or you learned on one thing. A lot of people are illiterate I'm illiterate in many things. So everyone's illiterate in certain things. And there are some fields that people are experts on. And that's like when it comes to like the secularists, the atheists, agnostics, usually a few sentences go by and you're like, this person knows almost nothing about, and sometimes I'll get them to explain. I'll say, so how would you describe Christianity? And they're like, they start talking and you realize they know nothing. And then it's like, so what would you describe as the Bible? What's the Bible? And it just all this strange stuff starts coming out. And it's like, these people know nothing. They know less than nothing. They know usually just wrong things. So anyway, let's continue.
Together, what was his goal? Like, what was he trying to do? And how did he approach you?
Yeah, so he's friends, or I should say was friends. He was friends with Billy. They live in the same neighborhood.
Oh boy.
So it's actually become really, it's become pretty rough for him. So he released a video yesterday, which I think people should go and check out, where he kind of gives his perspective. He's been friends with Billy for years. He was at Billy's wedding. Oof. Billy had 15 people at his wedding. Mark was one of them. And they live in this community in Florida. They're their sons are friends, their wives would hang out.
Oof.
And Mark told me, he's like, I've been hearing Billy say, you know, he wants to debate, nobody will debate him for years. And so as far as I think Mark was concerned, he was giving Billy the opportunity that Billy had told a lot of people he wanted.
Right.
And so he, you know, this was set up in that Mark and Billy have been talking. They've been on each other's podcasts in the past, and they've been friends, but more like business colleagues. Like Mark has come out and said, I hadn't really gone into the stuff he'd said about Christianity or ancient religions or whatever that much. Mark is he's a Christian. He has like a public profession of faith, and him and Billy had talked about the fact that they wanted to talk about like faith stuff and some of their differences, and that that Mark was kind of prepping for this, and his media manager Anton had sent him some of my stuff and said like, Wes has done some stuff on some things that Billy has talked about, and you know, maybe you should look up some of this stuff, you know, read into it. And Mark, very last minute, was like, well, I feel inadequate. Do you think I could just ask Wes? And so he DM'd me on Instagram and just kind of laid this out like, hey, I'm going to have Billy in my studio in 24 hours. I can tell him you're coming, can tell him who you are. I can like give him your background, but would you be willing to come? And so that's what I did. And so that's how it got set up.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but was Billy aware that this was going to be a debate, or did he think it was going to be just a discussion? Like, what did he think it was going to be?
No, he'd been given all of the prerequisites. Like he knew we're going to go over some of his stuff that he'd said about Christianity, that I was going to come in, who I was, what my name was, some of my background, and that part of the conversation was going to be me kind of asking him some clarifying questions and rebutting some of the things that he said. So you didn't watch the 3-hour live stream that they did you?
I watched chunks of it.
Okay.
I watched a little bit. I'm like, oof, and then I shut it off. Then I watched a little bit more. Oof.
Yeah, I watched the debate, and I sort of got about 40 minutes into it, and I was like, oh, it's just painful. The type of things that he was saying, like the Sinaitic Bible, I think he called it, the Sinai Bible instead of Sinaiticus, and that's usually an alarm, like he doesn't even know how to pronounce that Bible properly or the manuscript. And he was saying, oh, that one doesn't have the crucifixion of Jesus in it. And then he quickly turned and said, when he was challenged, and said, oh, I mean the Gospel of Barnabas or some other weird manuscript, which is like a medieval, like 14th century manuscript. And it's like, oh man, this guy, you know, it was just so strange. And, but this is the thing. A lot of these people have made careers out of just jumping online, and they've got a huge fan base, but what they're saying is not accurate at all. It's so wrong. But, you know, unfortunately, you know, there's so much illiteracy out there that people just go, yeah, and they follow these dudes. So, you know, like Wes Huff is sort of saying he basically just sort of jumped in. Now, I might actually get this clip of Wes. And so I'll just quickly start this up. Now, it might actually chew up the bandwidth, but I'll load it up, and, you know, he did this video.
Just hopping on here to say,
saying, I won't debate you. Okay. Now, I know the guys from Myth Vision were saying, oh, he won't debate us. Now, apparently, through the grapevine, I heard that me and Wes Huff, we were going to have a debate a few years ago on the King James Version issue. And then someone said, no, he didn't want to do it. Now, usually that can be taken 100 ways. You know, it's like, well, he didn't want to do it because he's too busy. He didn't want to do it because of this reason, that reason, or he's chicken, you know. And I was like, I reckon he's chicken, you know, sort of thing. But here's his explanation for being busy. And so basically, look, he's got 262,000 subscribers. He actually just did a video recently saying, thanks guys, I've reached 100,000, and that was like 3 weeks ago. So he's gotten like 162,000 on top since then. And with the Joe Rogan podcast, it's going to go up to 300,000 or 400,000 really quickly. So let's listen to this. It only goes for 4 minutes, so I'll just play this video through.
Hey everyone, just hopping on here to say that things have been crazy lately. My Christmas break had a little bit of Christmas and absolutely no break, but I do want to hop on here and just say something quickly. Since the Billy Carson thing, I have received, and I kid you not, hundreds of debate challenges from all over the map. Billy Carson followers, atheists, Muslims, agnostics, Mormons, even other Christians who think that I'm translating the Bible wrong or using a Bible translation they don't like.
So that would be me.
Everyone, from just regular people who think I'm wrong to other people in...
And while we're on the topic of this, I'll challenge anyone in the world who thinks that King James is filled with errors, Textus Receptus is wrong, blah, blah, blah. James White, Dan Wallace, anyone of that ilk, I will debate you. Talk to me about it.
Related fields with PhDs themselves. So let me just quickly say something here. I don't consider myself a debater. I'm not looking to become a professional debater. Have I done formal debates in the past? Yes. Will I do them in the future? Probably, but I am not obligated to agree to every debate challenge that comes across my desk, especially right now amidst the craziness that's currently taking place in my life. And I'm not running scared of you because I say no to your debate offer. My schedule right through 2025 was full last summer. I had told my wife I was going to do no more traveling or speaking months before I even interacted with Billy. I am not a full-time YouTuber. I have a full-time job, a job that has responsibilities and regular daily commitments. On top of that, I am finishing a PhD dissertation, and I know a lot of people don't know how much work and commitment goes into that, but it takes a lot of time during my week for researching and writing. Not to mention, I have a wife and kids. I have a number of events that are on my calendar, and they've been there for months prior to this, or have been in discussion for a long time leading up until this point that I have committed to. I am taking on basically nothing on top of that. Now, the caveat to that is that there are some people who have the, say, biggest platforms on the planet who, if and when they contact me, I am going to drop everything to do that and go to their interview. But that list of people could probably be counted on one hand. Let me say this. Some people have criticized me because I keep saying my schedule is full until 2026 and I can't debate them. But that I was asked 24 hours beforehand to debate Billy Carson, and I said yes. A formal debate requires prep. In fact, I have told people in the past that I will not agree to formally debate them earlier than 6 months in advance to that event.
So I understand, like I've done debates, and sometimes if it's something you're not really familiar with, you have to really put yourself into the shoes of that person. And if you're busy, yeah, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of your time, and you're doing it all just for one day, sort of thing. And he's saying, and I would agree, it takes quite a lot. Now, something you're an expert on, you can jump on the next day, sort of thing. Now, but it's interesting. He said it takes a good 6 months of preparation. But with this Billy Carson guy, he got a phone call the day before and said, "Yeah, that's cool," because this is how low hanging Billy Carson's stuff is. It's so lame that he felt like he could just jump on that the next day, and it's like, this stuff is so it's such low hanging fruit, it's going to be a cakewalk. And it was. And it's just surprising that so many people are into this stuff, But anyway.
Why? Because I want to make sure that I'm well aware of their position, how I can represent them accurately, understand their perspectives, and be able to interact with them knowledgeably and respectfully. The reason I didn't go through that with Billy is because I didn't need to. I could agree to debate Billy Carson and show the gaping holes in his perspectives and worldview with less than 24 hours prep. And I think pretty much everyone who has some sort of base level competency in the subjects that were talked about in that conversation with Billy could too. It just happened to be me who was given the opportunity to do so. If I turn you down for a debate, it could be because I would want to do the due diligence to respect your position enough to actually put in the work to properly interact with you. I could be saying no to you right now because I don't put Billy Carson and you in the same category. And I do think you're someone worth taking the time to be considerate with their time and prepping properly for. And I'm sorry, but right now, I just do not have the time to properly and honestly do that. I just find myself currently in an unusual season. So let me say thank you to everyone who's reaching out. I appreciate all the interaction. I really do. The traction this thing has gotten is dizzying, but I'm so thankful for you nonetheless. So with all that said, you know the drill. Go out there, love God, love people.
So the reason he can't debate me is because he's busy. No, I'm just joking. But at the end of the day, I think anyone with a certain level of competence, knowing and understanding the critical text side of things, should be able to debate me at any time. And like Joe Rogan said, it's like if someone woke you up in the middle of the night and asked you a question, if you're an expert on something, you might, slap yourself in the face a bit and put a bit of water on your face, but you'd be able to answer. And and that's why if Wes Huff isn't going to be on the debate circuit and he's a busy guy and all the rest of it, I challenge people who aren't as busy, who want to do a debate with me on anything related to textual criticism, Textus Receptus, King James Version, etc. I will debate you. And if you don't want to debate me, if you think I'm not good enough, there are plenty of people who I've interviewed on this channel who have said that they will debate, they will accept a challenge. So let's continue with the Joe Rogan one. So I just sort of point that out, that here, and I'm in agreement with Wes Huff on this, that Billy Carson was not, you're not going to even prep for an afternoon. He's just, the next day, like, I'll wake up and I'll just debate the guy, sort of thing. You just roll out of bed and you debate the guy, because his stuff is so weak and so lame. And all you have to do is listen to the debate, and the guy he's embarrassingly wrong. But let's continue.
Oof. Yeah. So unfortunately, Billy there says he had no idea going in. And I mean, as Mark said in his video that he released yesterday, I mean, that's patently false. He knew what it was going to be, who was going to be involved, and even some of the things that we would be talking about.
Okay. And he also was claiming that it wasn't a debate, that he had been involved in debates before and that he would prepare for debates, but this is something he didn't prepare. But again, it's like, if you ask me about things that I know about, you can wake me up out of a full sleep and give me a couple seconds. I'll go, oh, okay, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And if you know, you know.
And it wasn't a debate in one sense. Like, it wasn't. Like, we didn't do, opening statements and cross-examination and rebuttal.
Right.
It really was a conversation.
Right.
And it only kind of turned into a debate in the sense that Billy, I think, got caught out. And so the things that were talked about kind of showed that, that he needed to go on the offense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's all very unfortunate, but the good part of it is I was introduced to you and your work, and
there you go.
Very.
And so I as much as I disagree with Wes Huff on textual issues, like this, Wes Huff going on the Joe Rogan program is huge. Like, this is massive, and I think because you got to give credit where credit's due, I actually thought maybe what I could do was, have like some sort of screenshot where I'm asking certain questions, like, how did he do with this question or whatever? How did he interact with Joe Rogan? And, what about this section? Did he do okay? And just sort of like have a cross or have a tick. And as I was going through it, I was sort of in my mind just thinking about it, and I thought, well, actually, there's lots of ticks. Like, if lots of people who I go out ministering with, will go street preaching or handing out tracts and talking to people face to face. A lot of the time, people, I'm witnessing that with people like Wes. A lot of people would think that because I'm sort of known as a Textus Receptus guy, King James guy online, that's all I've got to talk about with everyone. But a a lot of the time, most Christians have no idea about me. And it's only really since I've been doing lots of YouTube stuff that people go, oh, you're that guy, you know. But most people have no idea. So I'll go out preaching and talking to people and all the rest of it. And then, you know, some people might bring up the issue of the critical text, Textus Receptus. But I've been out for months and months with people, and they haven't brought those issues up. And they're talking about the resurrection, talking about the crucifixion, and saying all the same stuff that Wes said in this. And so when I'm hearing this, I'm like, yeah, this is good. That's what needs to be said. But I'm just bringing out the fact that, you know, if you have something like Answers in Genesis, like I think that that's a good ministry, but there are certain flaws, you know. And I think the problem is when there is something good that has a bad, you know, it has, if you go into a restaurant and there's some good food there, but there's a fly in it, you're like, what a shame, you know, this is a shame. And that's what I'm sort of like with Huff. Like, I wish that, you know, these guys, I wish that Answers in Genesis, I wish, you know, these apologists would just stop gravitating towards the critical text material and mocking the Textus Receptus and King James, because it destroys their apologetic. And oftentimes they're basically saying the same stuff as Bart Ehrman. I'm not saying everything, but a lot of conclusions that Bart Ehrman has, they'll be in agreement with, you know. So and that's the problem. They're like, come to Christianity, but then you go to their Christianity and it's like, oh, we can't trust the Bible. Oh, okay, we have to know about these manuscripts. Oh, we have to ring up James White and find out what the text really says. And you ring him up, he's like, well, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, should be deleted. And you're like, okay, I'll ring Dan Wallace. And you ring him up and he's like, no, it should be in there. And these guys are friends and they're in the same camp, and they think that one verse, you know, one guy thinks the verse should be in, one guy thinks the verse should be out. So it's confusion. And so that's why I'm like, you know, guys, get it together, you know. And at the end of the day, like Answers in Genesis, they gravitate towards, you know, the James White, you know, the King James only controversy book is the best. And, you know, Wes holds this up and says, this is good, read this. He, you know, gravitate toward Mark Ward's material. But at the end of the day, you know, pray for these guys that they get away from this mess. Lots of pastors have gone down this road, and because the vast majority of colleges and seminaries, universities, whatever you call them, they are teaching the critical text. And so people, they have to learn this, and oftentimes they're just digesting it. They're busy, they got a life, they've got kids, they've got family, and they just swallow it all, and it goes into them, and they don't realize it's such a harmful thing to have such doubt on the word of God and go, oh yeah, 12 verses, yeah, we'll delete that, you know. And so this is what I'm critical of. So there's a lot of plus points, and that's why I didn't want to just jump into this video and just be the you know, kooky, angry King James guy who's just a jerk, you know. I wanted to go into this and go, hey, look, I would freely, yeah, when I go street preaching, I don't choose who comes up and stands next to me and goes, hey, I think you're doing a good job, let's get into it. And oftentimes it's people like this who are just looking for other people to encourage them and all the rest of it. But, you know, sometimes you meet people and you didn't know that they believed a certain thing. And the more I go along in my Christianity, the more I'm seeing the critical text issue is a blight on Christianity. It's just wrong. And so anyway, we'll touch more on that as those issues come up. Of course, Joe Rogan's going to go into a whole bunch of you know, rabbit trails, and because he doesn't know that much about the issue, he's just talking about Gilgamesh and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it's like, okay, you sort of, you know, I personally was sort of rolling my eyes like, oh yeah, you know. But it's just like when I talk to someone on the street, usually they're opinionated, they're just sharing their heart, what they think, and you know, that's no blight on Joe Rogan. He just doesn't know this topic. If he just spent a bit of time looking into it, he would know about it. And I'm sure that after this conversation, he's got a lot more questions. And so let's continue.
very, very extensive and very fascinating. And the videos that you sent me on Instagram, I watched both of those today as well.
Awesome.
So really, really interesting stuff. And your knowledge of the history of the biblical texts and the Codex Sinaiticus and all these different things, very, very fascinating stuff. So let's just get into your...
And I can't wait for the day when Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus are proven to be not modern day forgeries, but just not what scholars are saying they are at the moment. So it's going to be very interesting.
Background, like how did you get started in your research, and how did you get into this?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were missionaries, so I was born in Pakistan and spent a portion of my childhood in the Middle East, with my parents working in Amman, Jordan, and then a week.
And so that's interesting because I was interacting with Wes on Facebook about something that he said about the King James, and I was in Pakistan just recently, and I posted it, and I said, look, I'm actually near Multan, thinking maybe he knows some people there or whatever, because apparently his parents are missionaries. I actually thought maybe he was from a military family or something. But yeah, so I was just near Multan where he was born, just like 3 months ago. And so when he's saying he's from Pakistan, it's like, yeah, I've lived there for a year. It's an amazing place. It's a really good place for the gospel. But anyway, I'll continue.
He came back from the Middle East when I was pretty young. And so I grew up in this very diverse home in the sense that my mom was a missionary kid who grew up in India. And so we had a lot of worldview kind of perspectives represented in our home. Like I often say, we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon and the Quran on the shelf.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think, that always, although my parents were never overt with this kind of stuff, they always had the perspective that, we're Christians. We believe that this worldview perspective is true, but hey, this stuff isn't scary. This stuff isn't, off limit.
So Born Again Lunatic said, many modern apologists who now claim to believe in things like theistic evolution, for example, commenting I feel so much of modern Christian apologetics actually is just dishonest and trying their best to appeal to atheists. And sometimes I feel that too, because I came from atheism, agnosticism sort of thing. When I became a Christian, I've made some very strong, definitive stands. And I'm young earth creationist, and I make sure people know where I'm coming from. I don't hide. If I say I believe in hell, I believe in a literal eternal hell that goes forever. I believe in a pre-trib rapture. I believe, and I let people know where I stand. If I don't know where I stand, I usually tell them that too. But there were some times in this debate where I was like, is Wes Huff a theistic evolutionist? I wasn't sure. But then he was saying that there was another guy on the Joe Rogan show who was a creationist, and he said he agrees with his critiques on evolution. I was like, yeah, maybe not. But I guess the thing is, it wasn't like coming out and saying, hey, I'm a young earth creationist. But then again, and you only really know this just from, when you're talking to lots of people who are atheists, agnostics, and all the rest of it. Sometimes that can be a rabbit trail. So what happens is, it's sort of like the Jehovah's Witnesses trying to get you to talk about the Trinity when you're witnessing to them. It's like, you can go down that road, but you're going to spend your next 30 minutes talking about that. And that's fine if you want to go there, but it's like usually you're trying to give them the gospel. You're trying to say that you're not saved by works, you're saved by faith in Jesus Christ and Jesus, But sometimes it can be important to talk about the Trinity and the deity of Christ and things like that. So I guess it's choosing your battles. And with many of the things that Joe Rogan said, sometimes it's like, he's like, oh, this is, the Earth's 13.8 billion years old and all this sort of stuff. And I'm inside, I'm just laughing, going, no, it's not. And what would I say in that situation? But then that could lead on to just a whole bunch of stuff and a sort of like a clash and a fight that you weren't really, you sort of want to get to some main points. You're sort of like, okay, you can believe that, I'll move on. So, so I guess time will tell, because everyone will be critiquing this, and they'll be going through it saying, "Oh, why didn't he talk about evolution, more or whatever? Why didn't he talk about young Earth creationism?" And you'll see when that comes up. Probably not in this video because it's more in the middle of it. But I just sort of mention that sometimes you've got to pick your battles when you're talking to people who don't know that much.
It's, we can investigate these things, and they never said that outright. But that I always felt this kind of attitude of that kind of perspective, and having been exposed in majority Muslim contexts and seeing that kind of stuff, and my mom having like a pretty good knowledge growing up in India of things like Hinduism and Sikhism and that. I don't know how much of the kind of testimony stuff you watched of mine, but just before my 12th birthday, I actually was.
So just before he gets into this testimony, Born Again Lunatic said, not just that, but also they don't want to look dumb. And that's what I realize. If you're in a group of people and they're like, well, Christianity is stupid, the Bible's full of errors, and you say, no, the Bible has no errors. And like when I'm street preaching, like I've been surrounded by like 12 Muslim guys, and they say, no, the Bible's got errors. And I said to them, if you can show me one error in the Bible, I'll join Islam tonight. And they're all Googling and, 1 John 5:7, and I'm talking about that. And they're bringing up, last 12 verses of pretty much all that Bart Ehrman and these text critics all talk about. Because it's quite fascinating. You talk to the Jehovah's Witnesses, you talk to, Christadelphians use the King James. I should be careful about putting them in there. But Muslims, there are quite a few groups out there who do know a lot about textual criticism, and they'll use these as arguments against you. But and these are the same type of arguments, like I was talking before about the last 12 verses of Mark, 12 verses of the Pericope Adulterae, the woman caught in adultery story, deleted in most modern Bibles in the footnotes. Like it's in there, but they say it's not genuine and all this sort of stuff. So, so the whole thing about not looking dumb, like there's certain stigmas, and that's where, people just go, you're a King James onlyist. And it's like, okay, call me whatever you want, but I'll debate you rather than just put up a scarecrow term to try and discredit someone or ad hominem argumentation. Why not debate me on the particulars? And that's where these guys fall apart, because they don't have a leg to stand on. Their text was created by people who would be considered infidels by themselves. They would never get hardly any of these guys to come and preach in their church because they're so bad. They're so heretical. They wouldn't get George Van Smith or Carlo Martini or Bruce Metzger or Kurt Aland to come and preach in their church because it's like, these guys are heretics, But anyway, let's continue.
It was diagnosed with a neurological condition that left me paralyzed from the waist down.
Yeah, I did see all that.
Yeah. So that's a condition that's called acute transverse myelitis, which I often say is a word you can forget as soon as you hear it because it's a complicated one. But what happened was that I had the flu, and my body's immune system attacked the nerve endings at the base of my spinal cord and caused swelling and cut off the communication between my brain and my legs. And
instantaneously, right?
Yeah, basically. I'd gone down for a nap. I was camping out in the bathroom floor for flu reasons. And when I woke up, about 30 minutes later, I couldn't feel my legs. And so, that's the acute part of the acute transverse myelitis, was that it was basically instantaneous. And that's what made the diagnosis as severe as it was. Like they said, there's a 30% chance. It was like a small percentage of probability that I would recover, but a much higher percentage that there would be a lot of either complete paralysis for the rest of my life or some kind of issues with walking. It's related to like diseases like multiple sclerosis in that it's neurological and it affects that kind of thing. And 1 month from the day that I woke up and couldn't feel my legs, I woke up on a Saturday morning, got out of bed, walked over to my wheelchair and sat down.
1 month.
1 month. Yeah. January 8th to February 8th. Exactly.
Very fortunate.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What treatment did they give you?
So there, initially they gave me steroids to reduce the swelling, but so I spent 11 days in the hospital, being overseen by pediatric neurologists and specialists in this, because it's a very rare condition. And so they were studying me, and they gave me steroids, and they did some other tests, but really there was no true kind of treatment in that. So I was doing physiotherapy. I would be pulled out of gym class in school, but it was a little bit of a joke. Like, can you move your legs? You know, can you, it was.
Could you move anything?
No, nothing.
Could you feel anything?
No. In fact, when I was in the hospital, I'd wake up and there'd be pinpricks in my legs, because they'd be testing where the reactions were, and they'd have used a syringe. And so I'd wake up and there'd be these tiny little pinpricks in my legs, because they'd been testing while I was asleep to see what the kind of, whether it was registering neurologically with anything. But I couldn't feel anything. I was fully a paraplegic.
Whoa.
Yeah, but going back to that, like, so I experienced this, what I consider to be a true supernatural experience, in that I walked into the hospital to the doctors that had overseen me, and they were the first ones that used the word miracle. They said, we really don't have any type of medical explanation. And mainly because there was no atrophy. Because of the cutoff of the communication, my muscles in those 30 days were fine. And it's a short amount of time, but they said there should be something, and we're picking up nothing.
That's crazy. Because I've broken limbs before and had them in casts, and just in the 6 weeks that you have a cast on, you have massive atrophy.
Yeah. So that was the kind of.
So I sort of wanted to play that whole section and comment on that in one go, rather than cut it all up. Now I'll just let them sort of finish their thoughts, and then I'll talk about this healing.
Predication for them using the word miracle. And so that's kind of, it marks this, what I do consider to be like this supernatural, something happened. But
did you feel like that was like a calling that like led you to a very specific mindset after that?
It's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, as much as you could at 12 years old.
Right. But it must have had a significant impact on your psyche and your perceptions.
Yeah, well, it definitely led to things like later in life, I got very involved in athletics, in track and field.
And so I'll talk about it now. So I'm not a cessationist. So what a cessationist is someone who believes that after the Bible was finished, that the gifts of God, or things like healing, supernatural events like that, just no longer happened. And so what you usually find is cessationist churches, they don't necessarily go back to the New Testament, to the book of Acts, or to what Jesus did and go, well, I believe in that and I'm going to follow that. What they do is they usually they don't believe all the gifts are gone, because one of them's the gift of discernment. And a lot of people who are Baptists and, who are cessationists run discernment ministries. But if this is a gift, has that faded away too? So some people, they nuance that and say, oh, it's just the sign gifts, But usually it just depends. If you ring up John MacArthur and you say, okay, what gifts are there and what aren't? Usually they'll say, oh, there's no more prophets and there's no more, what's the other one? There's only pastors, evangelists, and teachers. There's no more apostles and there's no more prophets. But when you understand an apostle is just a missionary, in the Latin, missio means apostle. That's where we get our modern word missionary from. And so there are plenty of missionaries. Like when you understand these terms, sometimes the Baptists and also people like the Charismatics, Pentecostals, they have redefined a lot of these terms. And then it's not a biblical definition. A biblical definition of an apostle is just someone who basically just goes into a different land and preaches. And so that's what the disciples did. The 12 apostles that were sent into different areas to preach. and they're just missionaries, you know. So if you just change the word in your mind to mean, okay, an apostle is a missionary, not like a super apostle, you know, they're the leader of the ABC church and they're an apostle, they're the guru who you go to. No, it's just someone who does a job. It was always Paul, an apostle, not the apostle Paul, you know, sort of thing. But I'm not a cessationist. I believe that all the gifts are there. And I believe that when you've got the baptism of the Holy Spirit, you get all the gifts. That's what I believe. And so I don't believe we lack any gifts. Some people challenge me on that. I always point to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It talks about, yes, well, Paul said to Timothy, stir up the gift, singular, that's in you, that was given to you by the laying on of my hands. Now, that's a singular gift. But when you go to 1 Corinthians 12, he's talking about all these different types of gifts. So it's like a pizza. You get the whole thing. It's there. It's the Holy Spirit, but you divide it up to talk about it. So you talk about healing, talk about miracles, talk about all these sort of things. But it's all there. So anyone can operate in all them at any time. Now, 1 Corinthians 12 is regulated by a church service. He's talking about in the church do this, in the church do that. Like chapter 11 is all about, you're doing a communion properly and all this sort of stuff. So chapter 12 is obviously talking about in the church do this, do that. You don't just get 100 people to rush down and pray for someone who's sick. You get 2 or 3. So it says that do all heal, do all do this. Well, that's in a church service setting. But outside of that, you can do it. You can do what Jesus did. You can do what the apostles did. So that's what I believe. So that would be a distinction between myself and cessationists. So when Wes is telling this story, although it's not sort of at the level of someone just prayed for him and he got healed or whatever. I'm not sure if someone prayed for him or he just sort of got up and he was better. Because certain things come in my mind where it's like, okay, well, some people can get sick for a little while and they get better. And now I've prayed for people with multiple sclerosis and they've been healed. A friend of mine had multiple sclerosis, ended up in a wheelchair, same type of thing, but was able to get out of that and sort of function, but had a hand that ended up like this. And I never noticed it. It was really well hidden. And after I became a Christian, I was talking to her about, I believe God can heal. And she said, well, can God heal me of multiple sclerosis? I said, you don't have multiple sclerosis. She said, yeah. I ended up in a wheelchair when I was like 16. I was like, oh, okay, we'll pray. So I prayed. And she went to the doctor and they said, you don't have this anymore. And so I've seen that type of thing. One of my good friends, he was in a wheelchair with writer's disease. And when he became a Christian, he got healed of that. So he was rolling around in a wheelchair for a long time. And then he got healed of this. So I've seen tons of this. Usually when I go overseas, people always ask for prayer for healing. So I'm in that place where I see things happen. I'll just give you a quick example. And I don't want to make this all just about me, but I just want to let you know that that's what I believe. When I was in Fiji, in Lautoka, in 2001, 2 weeks after 9/11, we were street preaching there. It was a lot of street preaching about last days, and people were very interested. But we went to the hospital, and we were just going to visit one person. And there was a girl translating there, and she took us to see this lady. So we prayed for her, and then she put her legs on the side of the bed, and she sort of half stood up, and she was weeping, and I thought, oh, she's just in a lot of pain. And the translator said, no, you don't understand. She's completely healed. This is the first time she's been able to stand up for 3 months. And I'm like, oh, wow, And so the lady in the next bed said, pray for me. So we prayed for her, and she got healed. And so the doctor just came up to me and said, look, just go and pray for everyone. You can't go in the TB ward, but just go everywhere. So we were just going through and praying. Like there was this one lady, she was completely paralyzed. She couldn't move at all. And all she could do was move her eyes, and talk. And so going into the room, talking to her, and I just said, look, we'll just pray for you. So I'm there with a friend of mine, and I'm just praying. And it was almost like God just said, look at that. And I looked, the first thing that I saw was this green thing around her neck. It was like a bit of string. And so anyway, I just kept praying. And I said, so how'd you go? You feeling any better? And she's like, just lying on the bed, and she's like, "Oh no, I can't move," and so I'm like, "Okay, well, it didn't work," and I said, "Can I take this thing off your neck?" So I lifted her head. There's dead weight on her head. I lifted her head, pulled this green bit of string off, and put it in my pocket, and prayed again, and she got up and was 100% healed. And just started, like, out of nervousness, like, what's happened? She started packing everything up, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" She's like, I don't know. I'm going home, And then I said, "What's this green string thing?" And it had a bit of sticky tape around it. And I peeled it and opened it up, and it had a verse of the Quran there. So she was a Christian girl, and she went past the mosque, and it said, "Come in for a blessing," or whatever. So, some people are like, "Oh, cool, I'll best of both worlds." So she went in there. This guy put this on her, and not long after that, she was in hospital, completely paralyzed. What a blessing. And but yeah, how's that? I'm praying, and it was like, I looked at it, and I didn't know how to verse of the Quran there. So anyway, I see things like that happen regularly, and that's the sort of thing that I look for when I go to Pakistan and Cambodia and Philippines and everywhere. And so, just so you know that's, I'm not like, "Oh, all the gifts are stopped," and most people don't believe the gifts are stopped, because when someone close to them is sick, they're online saying, "Pray for me, pray this, do this," and they're believing that God will do it, but they just don't believe that it'll happen like the Bible says, that you'll pray for someone and they'll get healed. But I do believe that. So to me, I'm just believing the Bible straight. I'm not reading into it and trying to cut things out. And so anyway, let's get back to what Wes Huff was saying.
And part of that was feeling a conviction that I knew what it was like to not be able to wake up and walk out of the room.
Right.
And so taking that pretty seriously and competing competitively well into university, because even though, I wasn't the most naturally talented individual on the team, I felt like a motivation to be able to, okay, I don't want to waste this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then later on, in terms of your original question.
So I just want to answer Paul Anker. He asked the question earlier and I forgot. He said, "Is it true that the text of Isaiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls is exactly the same as the Masoretic text?" Yes and no. And so Wes Huff answered that way. And I was surprised that he did, because I was waiting for him to say, "Well, there's a certain amount of variation, blah, blah, blah." Now, it is so close that I've used that argument. The Dead Sea Scrolls basically affirm the Masoretic text, and the King James follows the Masoretic text, and so therefore it underlies the Old Testament for the King James version. But there, people who he actually mentions later on, like Elijah Hixson and Peter Gurry. I think he mentioned Peter Gurry. But if you go to the Text and Canon Institute, they, if I type in Isaiah scroll, they have articles basically saying that there's different readings. And so there's not a lot of these, but it's like Recovering the Resurrection in Isaiah 53, Textual Criticism and Easter. Now let's look at the Dead. So it says here, Dead Sea Scrolls. So they're basically saying there's an additional type of reading in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're saying, well, that's the oldest. Does the servant die, or how to read Isaiah 53:8? And so at the end of Isaiah 53:8, our major translations have, for the transgression of my people he was punished, the NIV, or stricken for the translation of a people, ESV. In each case, the translation has not accurately rendered the text. A strike was to them, negalamo. And so he's talking about these issues that are differences. So obviously every manuscript, when you talk about any manuscript, something that's handwritten is going to have mistakes. It doesn't matter what it is. From the ancient world, if you get someone writing the Odyssey, if you get the guy next to him copying it, he's going to have mistakes. That's just the way it is. It's like having print errors in a book. You're bound to, unless it's done so meticulously. But anything that's sort of like over 100 years old, you're going to find a print error or some sort of mistake in a book. So that it's very minor. It's very small. So the vast majority. So that's the Great Isaiah Scroll there that we're about to talk about, or later on. But the vast majority of the Dead Sea Scroll with Isaiah is the Masoretic text. And so to me, when people ask me about that and they say, oh, so it doesn't match up exactly, I'm like, no, it matches up like 99.99% of the time. And where it doesn't match up, we can't be sure that this was a temple manuscript. So we would understand that they would have had like original type of documents in the temple. And so that would have been the ones that people copied off. And so just say you wanted, a scroll for your community or synagogue or whatever, you would go to these originals and copy from them. So it doesn't mean that this was copied perfectly or anything like that. It's just like if someone said to you, hey, go on, we want the Bible. And so, well, you haven't got a photocopier. What are you going to do? Are you going to write it all out? And so you might make an error here and there. So, so that's what I usually say. So anyway, I just sort of mentioned that it's the answer is like yes. And have I answered like that? Yes, I have. When it comes to just the macro conversation, it's like, well, the Masoretic text backs up the King James Bible. That's usually what I say. And then I say the Dead Sea Scrolls back up the Masoretic text. But then there are these fine little things, and you've really got to look for them. But but that's in everything. You find these type of things. So yeah, thanks for that question. I thought it was really good.
The difference in that was that I realized, okay, there's something out there. Something happened that I can't totally explain on naturalistic terms. But how do we go from that to saying, okay, well then this worldview is correct? And so despite being raised in a Christian home, I felt like my parents telling me what was true is not the worst reason to believe it, but it's also not the best. And so as a teenager, I did a lot of kind of soul searching. And like I said, I was able to do that to a certain level of degree because of the openness within my household, where I pulled the Quran off the shelf and I read it, front to back, just trying to figure out, okay, what's going on here? What's all this about?
Right.
And it was through that period of like searching, and it wasn't a crisis of faith. That would be an over exaggerated term, but it was kind of
an inspiration of faith, perhaps.
Maybe. Yeah. Digging through. Okay. Well, what do these guys believe?
Right.
What is this perspective hold?
Right.
And that was about a period of about a year and a half. And at the end of that, I did truly feel that, okay, well, I think in the ways that in my limited ability as a teenager to investigate these things, I think that Christianity is true. But it wasn't until I went to university where I was engaging with people of other faith perspectives in Toronto at York University, where I was talking to Muslims and Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses and atheists, from the gamut.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having these conversations and I was expressing kind of my perspective on what I believed. And they would say things like, well, that sounds great, Wes, but, that's all the Bible. You can't trust that. And so that's where I started to take the
Mormons say that to you?
Well, yes.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, in the sense that,
the Mormon one is the craziest one.
Yeah.
Because we know who wrote it.
I think I really actually enjoyed that Joe Rogan said this. He's like, the Mormons are nuts. And I think that's one of the things when you look into the Mormons, you're like, it's so strange. And it's actually bizarre, like what the Mormons believe and think, and specifically their original teachings. Like their teachings now are really bizarre, but I mean, I know some people, they don't like Scientology and they mock it and all the rest of it. But I mean, Mormonism is like, yes, Scientology is nothing compared to the Mormon beliefs and polygamy and, all the strange, bizarre things that Mormons believe.
And he's a shady dude.
He is a shady dude. Well, no, they did in the sense that the Book of Mormon trumps the Bible. So they would believe, I think it's the 10th article of the Mormon Church, is that they believe the Bible insofar as it is translated. And so they have this perspective that there's been things that have been affected. I mean, Joseph Smith made his own translation of the Bible, and it's rough.
And when he was 14.
Yeah. Well, I think it was later on that he made the Joseph Smith.
See, what's a classic too with the Mormons? There are hundreds of places where you can see it's plagiarized from the King James Bible. And so here he is, like, Joseph Smith put it. If you don't know about Mormonism, look into it. It's nuts. Joseph Smith, he found some glasses, he put them on, and then he was able to sort of see in the spirit. And he found these tablets, and he translated these tablets, and that's where the Book of Mormon comes from. But then he lost the glasses, and so then he couldn't find the tablets anymore. But he had the Book of Mormon, But it just so happens to plagiarize from the King James, which is, like 250 to 300 years before, sort of probably 250 or maybe 200 years before. And, direct quotations from the King James. It's like in King James, archaic wording that was only sort of used around 1611, so obviously it's a fake. But, I mean, this just shows you a lot of people, they believe all sorts of strange things. There are deceptive spirits out there. People who are like, I feel a burning in the bosom, so it must be true. And some people, they think that their feelings are going to guide them into truth. No, the word of God will guide you into truth. That's what you really need.
Translation. But really? I don't even know if the official LDS Church ascribes to the Joseph Smith translation, because I think they even see this is, we know what the Greek and the Hebrew looks like, and this is not even. Yeah.
Well, he was, legitimate con man, which is fascinating. That people have such a deep search for meaning and truth that if you are confident, and which is what a con man is, confidence man. If you are really good at expressing yourself and really you show confidence in your convictions, you can persuade a lot of people.
Yeah. Confidence is not competency.
Yes.
And unfortunately, those things get confused a lot.
It covers up for competency sometimes.
Yeah. In religion and politics and all sorts of things, right?
In everything. Yeah, in everything. I mean, I think because people want to, it's very difficult to be an expert in a subject. And I think people want to believe that they are, and they don't want to do the work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's why, experts themselves feel a lot of inadequacy, is because they study a subject and realize, I'm never going to get to the bottom of this hole.
Right.
So, unfortunately,
most subjects are very, very nuanced and very deep.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when you're talking about ancient religion.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about things that were a oral tradition for a long time before they're even written down. So it's a long trudge to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah. And part of the whole, what I was trying to get.
I think, Wes Huff's correct. The more that you know about a subject, the more you know, the more you don't know, the more you realize that it just keep digging and you could go on forever. And I think it's a really important thing to know. But I really enjoy that statement. I've heard so many versions of it, but one that I like and I apply to myself is, I think it was Jefferson, but I heard someone else say something different the other day. But apparently Thomas Jefferson would say, be a jack of all trades or a master of one. Now, here in Australia, most people say, be a jack of all trades. I'm a master of none, just sort of joking. But I think it's important to become an expert on just one thing. And if you're a Christian, you're reading the Bible, you should become an expert just on one issue and just nut it out. Even just one book. You choose a small book, it doesn't have to be huge, or if you want, whatever tickles your fancy, but become an expert on that. And what that does, once you become an expert on it, then it leads on to 4 other things, and then become an expert on all those things. And it just continues to grow and grow, and you can just go on forever. But at least you're learning, at least you're growing. Where some people are just experts on nothing, and you go to talk to them about things, and they're like, "Oh, I think so," and I'm not sure. They're just never certain about anything. But I thought I'd just comment quickly on what Paul Ankus said here. I think that critics claim that Isaiah was written by 2 different authors, but the Dead Sea Scrolls were written all in one scroll. Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess they're talking about like different penmen. This is the type of thing that, you know, Bruce Matskill would talk about. I think it's been debunked. I think only really, you know, diehard critical text people would say, oh, you know, the second author, or I think they actually divide it into 3 parts. But anyway, they say there's like a separation when you get to, I think it's Isaiah 42. Oh, it's a different author altogether. But I don't think that. When I've read through, I'm like, oh, Isaiah 42, it's a different theme. But I don't think you have to be a different author to have a different theme. I mean, you can read through, any type of book and get to the exciting part. It doesn't mean someone else has taken over. And it's just silly to say that type of thing. And also Timothy Verkuterin said, again, no hostility intended, but regarding gifts, they are not all given to all believers. See 1 Corinthians 12:8 and following. To one is given the gift, to another a different gift. Yes, but I'm talking about in a church service. Or in 1 Corinthians 12, it's talking about a group of people who've gathered together. So in a service, it's different. Like I was saying, if you had the gift of healing, like just if everyone had the gift of healing, right? Say someone rolled in a wheelchair, you wouldn't get everyone to run down and pray for them. You just get 1 or 2 or 3 experienced people to pray for them, or else there'd be a stampede. And when you read in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, it's talking about the gift of tongues, the gift of prophecy, and things like that. And it says you can all prophesy one by one, that you can all learn. So that would contradict 2 chapters before where it says, do all prophesy? It's questioning that and saying, no, they don't all prophesy. But it's then 2 chapters later, it regulates it and says, you can all prophesy one by one, that you can all learn. So in other words, it's not saying that, one person gets this little bit and one person gets that. No, you get the whole thing. But the usage of it in a church service, you can all do it one by one. So just say it's healing. If someone comes in a wheelchair, it's like, oh, can I do that next time? It's like, yeah, you do that next time. You go down, you pray for them or whatever, And so we can all do it. You can all prophesy one by one, that you can all learn. And so I think, understanding that the gifts of the Spirit are for every believer. But the gifts of the Spirit are basically the internal power for us to look like Jesus and to behave exactly like he did. So that's what our job is as Christians. What would Jesus do? Well, to do what he did. What did he do? Well, 1/3 of his ministry was healing the sick, 1/3 of his ministry was casting out demons, and 1/3 of his ministry was preaching the kingdom. So we're to do that. That's what our job is on the earth. And so anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. So, but I appreciate the comment, and I don't sense any hostility there. Usually we get a lot of hostile comments, but I don't sense any hostility there. So thanks for that.
Get Billy in that conversation that I had with him to get to the bottom of partly was a question of methodology. Like I think he got frustrated at me at one point because I kept asking, what are the criteria that you're using when you're looking at one source versus another source and coming up with a conclusion? Because in historiography, it's the inference to the best explanation. And so there are different ways that you go about that, different methodologies. And historians very rarely disagree on the data and evidence. It's the conclusions that you draw from that. Right. But then there are some things that are just out and out false. And I don't think Billy totally knew what I was talking about, but it's those criteria that we look at when we look at something that does come from like an oral tradition and eventually gets written down and becomes a literary text. And then you analyze that on the basis of it being a literary text.
This is sort of the problem between with being self-taught rather than conventionally academically trained.
Definitely.
So I want to talk about that a little bit. But there was a question here by Boulders Align, weren't the Dead Sea Scrolls fake? And so I did make, I did see, I think it was you who commented on this after a few videos that I'd done, and I thought, well, maybe I did a speako or something like that. The Museum of the Bible, they're in Washington, D.C., and you can go to their museum, you know, and look at a whole bunch of manuscripts and old Bibles and things like that. Now, they had a bunch of Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, they had them tested, their own collection, and every single one of them was proven to be a modern-day forgery. So that's the ones that are proven fake. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, are genuine. I guess I'm not even sure, you know, what's been dated and what hasn't. Some of these things get dated, some of them don't. I think every important document needs to be dated with XRF technology. They need to be probably chemically tested for, you know, the type of inks that we used, etc. And so I think that's important, because when we're dealing with the dating of things, just like with works of art, you don't want to spend $1 million on a work of art just to find out that it's a fake that's done like in the 1920s. You know what I mean? And so some of these biblical documents are so important, and they change the face of Bibles. And so we want to know what the date of these things are. And so, yeah, the Museum of the Bible, all the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Museum of the Bible were proven to be modern day forgeries. That was only done in like 2020. So we're advocating for Vaticanus to be tested. It's very interesting that Nehemiah Gordon, who was on this program just in the last month, he had gone to the Vatican and tested with XRF technology the ink in Vaticanus. And so I think that what's happened is the cat's out of the bag, that Vaticanus is actually later than has been previously said. I just going through the article that was written by Nehemiah Gordon, I think there's the puppy feet of a huge argument that basically says that this document could be 11th to 12th century. And so I could be wrong. I could be reading it wrong, but that's what I think. And so I did 2 videos on this, and after I did those videos, I was like, I think this is what's going to happen. And so I'm excited about that. I think Sinaiticus needs to be tested as well. Sinaiticus is sitting in the British Museum. There's no real restrictions. There's no reason it should be restricted from being looked at and examined and tested scientifically. So I think we should test everything. So I'll just go into this section. So this is like another section where they're talking about, you know, being self-taught,
where you're trained in very specific disciplines and you're taught to understand the foundation before you understand like how to put a window in.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of things that you have to know from the base, from the beginning. Like, do you have a water line? Do you have power? Like, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things going on when you're trying to construct an expertise in something, especially something that is so complicated. And one of the things that I've gotten out of I've probably watched probably 20 hours of your stuff over the last couple of weeks, and you've spent a lot of time on this. This is not a casual cursory examination of these texts and of religion. This is a long journey, and that's what's particularly exceptional and really interesting to me, because I'm always fascinated by people that have really gone down the road, like really gone down the road, because you don't meet a whole lot of them. You know, I know a lot of Christians that can quote you some versions of the New Testament, you know, some Psalms, but but the real, the go all the way to the back, way, and that's what you've done. That's very interesting. So this is like, how old are you?
I'm 33,
which is very young for someone who has
chicken.
The depth of knowledge that you have.
And see, I guess this is the thing. Like, I understand there are things that Wes says that are they're good. You know, anyone who's in apologetics should know those type of things. But when it comes to biblical text, when it comes to issues like the King James, the Textus Receptus, like oftentimes I'm seeing him say stuff on Facebook, and I'll jump on there and say, well, what about this? What about that? And I guess, you know, sometimes I might be the only person who's actually throwing that at him, or he might not have ever thought of it before. But sometimes things just sort of sit there and they don't get answered, you know, because and to me, I'm like, well, I've sort of stumped you with that, because I'm often thinking about these things, you know, doing programs on critical text versus Textus Receptus, those type of things. And so when it comes to the text issues, like, I mean, you know, if I was to put Wes on a scale of 1 to 10 with talking about the biblical text, critical text issues, I would say, like, you know, someone like Elijah Hixson, he knows his stuff. You know, when it comes to, you know, looking at the text and all the rest of it. But some people are better on the philosophy behind the text. But I mean, you know, someone like Dan Wallace, he knows a lot about the critical text and all the rest of it. But I guess the thing is, like he just said, he's 33. You know, Dan Wallace, he's, you know, I don't know how old he is. I'm guessing, like, you know, probably maybe 70 or something like that. He might be older, I'm not sure. But and so I guess, you know, it just comes with experience and time and all the rest of it. But yeah, for someone like Joe Rogan, Wes is like, oh, you know everything, you know. And this is the danger where, you know, Wes comes across like that, and then people jump onto his website and it's like, oh, you can delete these 12 verses from your Bible. The woman caught in adultery. Oh, the last 12 verses are marked. You don't need them. This verse, the King James has, you know, got these problems and all the rest of it. And it's like, and the thing is too, like, a lot of people, all they do is just put up the scarecrow, King James only. You know, that's what they do. And everyone falls under that label. Oh, King James only. If you just critique the critical text guys, oh, you're King James only, you know. And that's what James White does with these 5 categories of King James onlyists. That includes majority text people who just prefer the King James, people who are Textus Receptus only, people who are, you know, wild, you know, only the English King James, you know, everyone pretty much except for critical text guys are King James only. So when you have a logical, well thought out, sophisticated argument against what they've just said, they just go, scarecrow, King James only. That's you. Ha ha ha. You know, and it's like, can't we talk about this? Can't we think about it? And so that's what I find is apologists usually, you know, online, these guys on YouTube, they're just King James only. It's something to be mocked, and they'll just they'll find the weirdest person and go, they're King James only. Let's talk about them. And it's like, well, why don't you talk about what I'm talking about? No, we have to demonize you first. And that's what apologists are taught to do, to demonize people who come against the critical text. And so,
you know, so you've been doing this essentially from that miraculous moment. That ignited this spark, even though you came from a missionary background, and then from then on. So for the past 11 years, 12 years, or 20 years, 30 years, like it's your whole life, essentially. It's all been this.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, I went to university with full intention of going into the police force. I did like my undergraduate studies, and then I kind of mapped out this plan that I was going to become a police detective, and that was my goal. And I think I realized
why not? Because you like getting to the bottom of things.
It could be
because you do.
Right? Yeah. Well,
when someone who spends 21 years like getting to the bottom of a religion, you know, you'd probably be pretty good at cracking cases.
I hope so. I think that might have been part of it. I also. There was an aspect of when I was in high school where they were like, you got to figure out what you're doing. or you're going to be homeless and you're going to die.
Yeah,
like
I remember that part.
I felt that like
it was
the
terrifying
pressure.
moment in life.
Man, I always tell people when they're in high school, like, you can chill out. Like, it's going to be okay.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? I wonder if it's different now, because
I think you should have a certain amount of desperation, because I think that it ignites the fire within you to do something.
There's probably something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people that I know that have been too pampered and taken care of and didn't have a fear of everything going completely sideways, they never really get the momentum that's necessary to accomplish things in life.
Yeah, there's probably something to that. I mean, desperation.
A little desperation, fear, I think, is good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody wants to be comfortable. I don't think that's necessarily a good path. I mean, I think you should have perspective and you should enjoy your life as a young person and have those, but you should also realize you got work to do.
Well, and stress is good. Right? Stress creates perseverance and creates patterns that allow you to succeed.
Yes.
I mean, this is like athletics 101, right?
I think that's very important.
You got to push yourself. And I think actually part of that also led in, like, I'm a big believer in athletic discipline needs to go hand in hand. I mean, I know you are too. It needs to go hand in hand with any other type of, like, whether it's an intellectual endeavor or like, because it trains you to be able to go into places that are uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that uncomfortability allows you to then become stronger, you know, realize where your inadequacies are. And especially when you're with people who are better than you. I mean, when I was running at York University, there were two guys on our team who, because I was okay individually, but I ran for the relay team. Yes, I was a sprinter. And one of the guys was part of the they medaled when Canada medaled at Worlds. He was part of that relay team. And then my other training partner, Busy, who he ended up competing in Tokyo for Canada. And when you're beside someone who is like just a genetic freak, you're like, oh, okay, like that's different. Yeah. Right. And it both pushes you, but it also reveals your limitations, where that doesn't inhibit you. Like you shouldn't. That shouldn't discourage you to go up to that line of being able to push yourself. But at the exact same time, it creates a realism that, like, I can train as much as I want to. I'm not going to run like that. Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, but going back to what you were asking, like, I think there was part of that in wanting to go into the police force, but then realizing, like, around my third year of university, that my passions and motivations were very, very different, and that I didn't know how to go about that or where the proper place to do that was, but I knew that I needed to lean into that to some degree, particularly with the Bible, because I was claiming that this Bible talks about this guy Jesus, and I'm a Christian. So I have a friend, Andy Bannister. He's out in the UK, and he says if you take Christ out of Christian, all you're left with is Ian. And Ian's a great guy who's not going to save you from your sins. And so, like, if I'm wrong about the Bible, those people who push back on me, right, those skeptics of various worldviews, if the things they were saying about the Bible were true, then it did actually legitimately undermine what I believed. And so I needed to take that seriously. I had an obligation to actually investigate those things as far.
And so that's one of the reasons why I critique the critical text side, is because they legitimately come and undermine what I believe about the Word of God. And so I think, you know, he's saying that that's one of the reasons, you know, he grew up and he had to say, well, is the Bible correct? And you know, he's a young guy. I'm hoping that, you know, he will grow and he will start questioning things. And no doubt, if he already is, he's coming out and saying, delete the woman caught in adultery, delete the last 12 verses, Mark, you know, or, you know, just have these footnotes that say they shouldn't be in there and all this stuff. Delete all these other verses, you know, have a Greek text with 2,900 less Greek words, you know, follow the critical text. Yeah, he's going to come under fire for that, because that's the reason why we talk about James White and Dan Wallace and, you know, Peter Gurry and Mead and all these other guys, is because of that. Like Answers in Genesis. Like if you know, I could speak to the leadership there and say, if they said, "Oh, what could we change?" I'd say, well, you need to get back to at least Textus Receptus Bibles, at least using the New King James, at least, you know what I mean? But then I would nuance that and say, always thinking that the King James is a final standard, a final authority. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's what I usually say to people, because a lot of people don't go, they're like, oh, King James is too hard, it's too old, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, at least go to the Textus Receptus. Don't get into this critical text crowd mess. It's so bad. You basically just, talking about like Mormons and how strange and how weird they are. The creation of the Westcott and Hort text, the creation of the Nestle Alarm text has these type of characters involved with that type of thing. Strange, weird type of stuff. And so, anyway.
As far as I could.
But yeah, I was going to talk about, it's good, I picked the ad, so I'll fast forward this. I think there's only 2 ads that appear in this whole thing. But I was going to talk about being self-taught. See, this is sort of frowned upon a little bit here, where Joe Rogan's like, yeah, these guys who are self-taught, that's a problem. And where's Huff's like, yeah, you can tell when someone's self-taught and all the rest of it. But the problem is with being self-taught. See, if you're taught the wrong things, which I believe the critical text is hopelessly wrong. If you're taught evolution, for example, you taught something wrong, and so you've got to think these things out for yourself. And so I think you're being self-taught is something that it should be the gut of every believer, that we don't just swallow what we're taught. We question it. We're like the Bereans. We check and see if these things are so. There's so many Christians don't do that. They just go, oh, well, James White said this, and Michael Brown said this other thing, and I'm just going to follow that. Now, if what they've said is true and you've studied that and you're going, okay, I agree with that, with what they're saying there, well, that's fine. But if you never think about it, you never look these things up, you're just going to follow man. The Bible is very clear. They'll heap up for themselves teachers having itching ears, and they'll be dragged away from the truth. You just got to be careful, just swallowing everything that comes down the pipe. So hopefully I can just fast forward this ad to the point where I want it. Okay, we're back.
g.co/audio.
What is the oldest version of the Bible or the stories in the Bible? Is it the Dead Sea Scrolls?
So it's Paul Anker said, are Sinaiticus and Vaticanus online to view? And Hilly Billy put up codexsinaiticus.org. And you can also look up Vaticanus, which I think he's put a link here. But if you just type in Codex Sinaiticus, the Vatican website comes up, and you can usually look at it that way. And so, yes, they are online to view.
Or are there older versions?
The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest of the Old Testament. So when they were discovered, so they were discovered in 1946 to 1957. And at that point, during their discovery, they pushed back a lot of our previous oldest manuscripts 1,000 years, which was a big deal.
How old are they?
They're anywhere between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century BC. So it's kind of tricky because the Dead Sea Scrolls they're like a library that we refer to. So it's approximately 970 documents, but it's distributed out between 10,000 and 11,000 fragments. So there's a lot going on there, right? So, and some of these, are so fragmentary that you look at them and it's like confetti, because they're, 3,000 years old, but not quite that. They're like 2,000 plus years old. Right?
Animal skins too, right?
Well, all sorts of things, animal skins, papyri, and then some of them are actually done on copper. Really? They're like inscribed in copper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one of the coolest ones. Actually, this relates because I know you're a Marco Allegro guy. The first time I was introduced to Marco Allegro was not his Sacred Mushroom and the Cross stuff, but he published a book on what's called the Copper Scroll, because part of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments is this inscribed document on copper, which is an ancient treasure map.
Can you see it? Is it
Yeah.
online?
Yeah, Jamie, pull up hey.
There it is. Wow.
Yeah. So it's in Hebrew, and it is wild. So it has these sites where it says buried treasure is found.
Whoa.
And there have been a number of guys who have tried to like look for it. And so
does it say what the treasure is?
You know what? Off the top of my head, I don't know. But
look how crazy that language is.
I know, right? And so, but the Dead Sea Scroll, so it's like stuff like this. It's papyri, it's animal skins, and it's a number of different languages. So the vast majority of it is in Hebrew, but there's also a lot in Aramaic and then Greek and in Nabatean. So it's like an umbrella term to just describe a whole bunch of literature. So a lot of it is biblical because it was written by this group out in the desert called the Essenes who lived at Qumran. So, but then other stuff of it is just, it's just Jewish literature of various stripes that were hidden in caves all around the Dead Sea.
So the scroll.
So Paul Anker said, what do you think about the idea that some readings were preserved in other languages, and how much weight can you give to them? And so thankfully we've got so many manuscripts, and the vast majority of them back up the Byzantine text, the underlying text of the Textus Receptus, which underlies that King James. And so what I've found is critical text scholars will use any type of story to say that Erasmus back translated from the Latin, this type of thing, and even when they say in their own words, like Theodore Beza says, Revelation 16:5, I've got an old ancient manuscript of good faith with this reading. People just go, well, where is it today? We don't have it today. So he's a liar, or he tricked himself, or just make up any excuse. Really, it's sort of like, I guess they've got like 10 excuses for that type of thing. When it doesn't fit their narrative, they're just like, well, let's just say that Erasmus, fell over in the print shop and, spilt ink everywhere, and, they had to quickly rush to print. There's all these anecdotes about Erasmus. He was rushing to print. So every time you hear someone talk about Erasmus, it's like, well, he did quickly do they always say this sort of stuff. And even, just the innocent people who are just trying to talk about Erasmus, they always say this because the scholars are saying it. But it's just these anecdotes that these guys are the Three Stooges. They're bumbling fools. They don't know what they're doing. And then stories like the last 6 verses of Revelation were back translated from Latin are ridiculous. They're so ridiculous. Erasmus said that he had back translated a few words. And when you read through his annotations, he's clearly talking about Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. And he said it was a homoioteiton, which is a similar ending. So sometimes we're reading a book and we skip a line because it's got a similar like little ending there. And we're like, oh, I've skipped a whole line. And so that's what happened. He recognized that. He said it was a few words. Now, later on, they found this manuscript that had 6 complete verses missing. And they're like, that's the one he used. And it's like, are you sure about that? It's like, yep, case closed. He lied to everyone and said, it was a few words. It was actually 136 words deleted. And he back translated that from Latin. And so then they go, well, he also did all this other back translating from Latin. But then it contradicts their whole story about 1 John 5:7, because wouldn't he just back translate that from Latin? You know what I mean? He was like, oh, I'm looking for manuscripts here and there, and he's finding these manuscripts. And it's like, because he didn't have the Comma Johanneum in his first 2 editions. But then in his third one, he said, yeah, I've got it in there because of Codex Britannicus and, these other things. Wouldn't he just go, well, I don't need a manuscript, back translate? It just contradicts what he was doing, everything he was doing. He said he had the Greek readings for it. And so this is the thing. In 1527, Rome was sacked. There were about 10,000 people killed. Lutherans and a whole bunch of Spaniards and other people went to Rome, robbed the libraries. Basically, they sacked the place. And places were burnt, churches were burnt, massacres, all sorts of things. and that was in 1527. So before that, that was basically the end of the Renaissance in Rome, because that was the main hub for the Renaissance. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, tons of manuscripts are gone. There's upheaval. There's a whole bunch of things that have happened there. So manuscripts go missing. And this is one of the things that people today, with the critical text, are only dealing with what they got in their hands. And half the time, too, they're going with readings that the manuscripts look like now because they're faded. There are some manuscripts that are really famous manuscripts that the custodians were clear and said, oh, this reading is this and this reading is that. All the way through time, they're like, yeah, it's starting to fade, like 100 years ago. And now they got it today and they're like, oh, those lines are faded, or we think it reads something else. And that's what you read in the NIV, ESV. That's how silly a lot of these critical text arguments are. And so to me, this is just as silly as evolution. It's as silly as believing any type of myth, Mormonism, whatever. But there are a lot of there's a lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to finding accurate information about the reformers. People like Erasmus, Aldus Manutius, Lorenzo Valla, Bessarion, Stephanus, Tremellius, Junius, Theodore Beza, King James translators. All of these guys have been smeared. That they're this, they're that, they're off the wall. And so, but it's mostly the most famous ones who King James TR people say, well, this guy was a good guy. Theodore Beza did this. And they're like, oh, he lied about this manuscript. That's only just recently come out. They some people retranslated his Latin, and they were like, hang on, he's saying he's got an old ancient manuscript with this reading. And it's just come out that it's like, no, he tricked himself. He thought he had a reading, and he wrote down that he had a reading, but he didn't. And that's coming from the top. That's coming from the Academy, Jan Krans over in Europe there in the Netherlands. And I'm just like, where are you getting this? This is ridiculous. And so that's the whole thing about thinking for yourself, not having to toe the party line, not having to go, because a lot of these apologists and people who work in these institutions, Museum of the Bible and all that sort of stuff, like I would never get a job there because I'm critical of all these other new Bibles that are coming out and their readings and all the rest of it. But these guys would get a job there. That's why they've got paid work in the area of apologetics, to do with textual criticism, to do with the text, the Phoenix Text and Canon Institute and all these guys. That's why they've got jobs there, because they would never ever hire someone who's outside of that. And to me, the stuff that they talk about is as dumb as people driving along with a mask by themselves in a car. You know what I mean? It's like, what on earth are you doing? And so that's why I do these videos. I'm trying to get people away from that sort of stuff. So I do agree with the red letters here. It's going to be a process because, I'm critiquing Wes Huff on the bibliology aspect, but I think there were some things that he said that were very good for a witness, for Joe Rogan to think about. There were seeds planted there that I think would open Joe Rogan's eyes, and lots of viewers watching would go, yeah, that's an interesting thing that he said there. And so it says here, this is going to be a process. I hope Joe comes to Christ. And he corrected this, but you can't convert him right there and then. The whole podcast was a great testimony. He'll be back on again, and it will happen. And this is one of the things when you're witnessing regularly to people. I know when you're on the street one-on-one, you might never see that person again. You usually you wrap it up with the gospel and all the rest of it, and you're like, well, heaven, hell, must be born again. But when it comes to like long-standing friendships or and that type of thing, I think and also knowing, because some people have already been preached to, so actually just repeating it again, they're like, well, I know this, and so I'm sure that people have taught, said to Joe Rogan stuff, and I'm sure that Wes Huff's probably gone through and data mined, the videos that are pertinent to this type of issue, and he's probably had Christians on there saying, the Bible says you must be born again, and preach to him. So yeah, he's not ignorant of these things. And so that's like with me. If I meet someone who's been in church for like 10 years, and I don't preach to them the same as I do to everyone else. I just, try to be friendly with them because they know it. They know it. Like you could say, "Hey, preach the gospel," and they'll preach it. They can quote the Bible. They know stuff. You know what I mean? And so you got to weigh every situation. So I think the red letters here is correct because sometimes it can be like, "Well, they're not preaching the gospel right here, right now." And it's like, well, yeah, I understand, but and we're all different. Some people, I would preach a little bit more than Wes did. I would draw it back to young Earth creationism as well. I would draw it back to being critical of textual criticism. But I think it's a good point that Red Letters has brought out there. Hilly Billy's, actually, I won't read through those. I'll just keep playing. I get into that habit where I just start reading through all the comments and I'm like, what am I doing? Okay, let's continue.
Rules, as it were, aren't all biblical. Some of them is just accounting of the times.
Yeah. Oh, Jamie looked it up. 65 tons of gold and 26 tons of silver.
65 tons.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. How many Cuban links can you make out of that?
You can see why someone would try to track that down.
Boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, like you have ones like the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is fully complete. Like it's a copy of the book of Isaiah, and it's a full complete scroll.
So Timothy has said, how do old scholars think about textual criticism, Metzger, Carson, etc.? Well, I mean, the older guys, it's quite interesting because someone like Metzger, he's a heretic. He says there's mistakes in the originals. So when Matthew was writing his document, he made mistakes, and that God whether God wrote it or not, half the time you can't tell with these guys, but they don't believe in the preservation of Scripture. They don't believe in the infallibility of Scripture, that there's not mistakes in it. And so that's why the critical text has, Jesus going to the wrong location, or there's just these huge solecisms there that no Greek writer would ever make, or, just wrong geography, wrong genealogy, this type of thing. All the way through the critical text, you don't have those issues in the Textus Receptus. And so oftentimes, what we have is a text by Westcott and Hort. Westcott and Hort had a Unitarian called George Van Smith work with them, who's like a Jehovah's Witness. So he was on their team. So he was part of the creation of this never-seen-before Greek text, which basically got Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and smashed them together and said, okay, well, that's what we got now. Now, Nestle, he basically based his text on that text and a couple of others, and it got down through time to, Metzger, Kurt Aland, but they also had Carlo Martini, who was a Jesuit. He was one of the main guys working on the text from 1975, and the United Bible Societies, he worked for them. And so this text, the Nestle Aland text and the United Bible Society text is basically the same thing. But some of these scholars are absolute heretics. They've had Mormons work on the Old Testament. What on earth? Why would you do that? And so wouldn't you separate from these people? Shouldn't Metzger, Kurt Aland, these other guys, shouldn't they separate from a Jesuit guy? This guy was in line to be a pope. And so anyway, I'm not having a go at you, Timothy, but I'm just sort of saying, like, these other scholars, they have adopted heretical things. If you just type in Metzger Pope in images on Google, it'll come up all these pictures of him with the Pope, with the Archbishop of this and that, and people, leaders in the Greek Orthodox Church, and and he's giving them his Bible and saying, now we've got a Bible we all agree on, Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox, that we've got the same Bible and all this sort of stuff. And so there's a lot of problems with these guys, and see, what you have is a really, really bad text with a really, really bad foundation, and then you get now people who are Protestant. I believe in the Trinity. I believe in the deity of Christ. I believe in the resurrection. And they believe all these things, but then they're adopting this mess into it. And so, and half the time, like someone like Wes, he's just like, well, this is what you do. You follow Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and that's what he's taught in school. Where I'm like, no, think for yourself, think outside of the box. You don't have to follow this mess, So, and Metzger, Carson, I've got, Leo Carson's book there, the King James Version Debate, A Plea for Realism, gone through that. And most of these guys aren't really saying anything of substance against the Textus Receptus. They just demonize people. It's a scarecrow thing. They just call people King James only, And so that's usually what they do.
But then other ones are so fragmentary that we think they're written in Hebrew, but we can't actually tell.
Oh, wow.
Because no one's willing to piece these. And this is true for a lot of stuff. So the largest grouping of papyri literature in the world is the Oxyrhynchus collection, which we get a good portion of our oldest manuscripts of the New Testament from. But if you go to Oxford and you look at the Oxyrhynchus collection, and you pull out that drawer, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And you're like,
right.
Like most of it is untranslated, untranscribed, because the amount of man hours that it would just take to even put it together, never mind then go to the effort of transcribing and translating it. And most people are not willing to do that.
And if you're missing chunks, how do you even make that puzzle connect?
Well, that's part of my area of speciality and research is in regards to that. So I study paratextual features. We're really going to get nerdy today.
Let's get nerdy.
So you look at the features of the manuscripts, not necessarily the words, but things like the spaces between the words, the development of punctuation, indentation or outdentation. And I look at the margins and I try to, based on the average size of manuscripts in and around that time, and also the average spacing of words and the margins on the top, bottom, and the side, recreate what the manuscript could have possibly looked like.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So when you say the book of Isaiah is intact, how similar is it to the book of Isaiah that's in the Bible?
So that one is fascinating. So this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but when we discovered the Great Isaiah Scroll, previous to that, the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had was in the Masoretic text, which is in the Middle Ages.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it was literally 1,000 years. We literally pushed back our understanding of Isaiah 1,000 years. And the thing that really shocked scholars, like I said, this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but one of the things that shocked them about Isaiah was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text.
Word for word.
Word for word.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that
So this
right
is the
there?
Great Isaiah Scrolls.
So I guess, like Calvin's asking, Nick, have you watched the full podcast? And I know, I've got people texting me saying, hey, I don't like Wes Huff, and I'm thinking that I'm just supporting him. What I'm doing is I'm like, okay, this guy, he's a Christian guy. So, obviously we're not going to agree, with everything everyone does. But what he's saying here is great. I'm like, cool. It doesn't mean what he's going to say next is great. That's why I'm going, no. And so I'm going, yes, no, yeah. And that's what I'm doing all the way through this. And so in a sense where, have I watched I listened to it today, and that's why I felt like I needed to do something tonight. But yeah, I'm more like, okay, well, yeah, cool. He said something good there. Okay, no, he said something that I wouldn't say it that way, or no, I wouldn't do it this way or that way. And so, yeah. So the next question was, statement says they didn't take Codex Vaticanus. I'm not sure how that fits in, but I might have missed something there. And so let's continue.
So if you go to Israel and
is that papyrus?
Yes. No, I think that one is vellum.
What is vellum?
So I should be more specific. So parchment is animal skin. Vellum can be used synonymously with the term parchment. Technically, parchment is like baby animal skin, like calves or lambs. But this is the Great Isaiah Scroll, and you can see like they stitch together the parchment because it's so long.
God, it's so beautiful. The way they wrote back then was so beautiful. I mean, maybe it's because I can't read it. That it's so fat. Maybe if I saw English, I would think that's beautiful too.
Yeah,
especially script, like cursive. Cursive is very beautiful. But that is so fascinating because obviously coming from a point of ignorance, the letters look so similar. Like so many of this is the what I always got about cuneiform. When I look at that, I'm like, it's just one particular sort of character that's this way and that way and up and down. And
cuneiform is wild.
Weird.
It's really, really tricky. And that's the thing when, like, if you're studying ancient languages and you start to study Greek, like the Greek alphabet is similar enough that you're like, okay, alpha looks like an A, right? Delta looks like a D. So you can figure it out. And so it tricks you because you start off and you're like, oh, this is phobios, fear. I know what a phobia is. And you get this false sense of encouragement. And then, the further you go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh, I'm screwed. So, but Hebrew is completely the opposite because the writing system is so different. The learning curve is hard at the beginning. And then you're like, everything is just 3 letters with a suffix added to it. And so it feels like, whereas the opposite is true with Greek. Greek, you're like, I get this. And then when you really go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh crap, none of the things that I learned about that are supposed to be standard, all of them have exceptions.
Wow.
But cuneiform's a wild one.
Do you know who Rick Strassman is?
No.
He's
And so Paul Anker asked, are you still back and forthing with TurretinFan? Yes. So TurretinFan did a video about the upcoming debate that we're going to have on Revelation 16:5. He did a video just yesterday. So I'm still, listening to all that sort of stuff and following what he's saying. And, I don't mind, he's going through stuff. Yeah, he's critiquing my work and pretty much everyone's work on that issue. And so I guess he's trying to prepare himself for a debate. And I asked him, when should we do a debate? And he said 3 months to 6 months. I think he was just going to say 6 months, but so three to 6 months. So I think he just needs time to sort of get his head around a few things. And so, yes, and Calvin's pointing out that issue where the modern versions are called Jesus a liar in John 7:8, where he says, I'm not going up to the feast, where the King James says, I'm not going up yet unto the feast. So, that's an issue. And also Calvin is saying, he fails to tell Joe that these manuscripts were literally found in an ancient dump. Well, I guess, one of the things is a lot of these manuscripts, papyri and all the rest of it, was sort of found in dumps. I guess what they used to have was a geniza, or they had a place of burial for these manuscripts if they made a mistake. And so this is one of the things. Oftentimes they're burying manuscripts with mistakes in it. So if it had the name of Jehovah on it, sometimes they couldn't destroy it. They had to bury them. And so when they find a manuscript, it could be the one that's got all the mistakes in it, or it could be a Gnostic thing, but it's like, it's got the name of Jehovah on it, so they just bury it, So that's sometimes why they're still preserved. And all the good ones are worn to pieces because everyone was using them. All the Christians, millions of Christians are like, there's the good one, and they're all reading it. And then the Gnostic one's sitting there in the sand for 1,500 years or whatever, and it's like, now we find it and we're like, yeah, that's the one, And so these are all things that need to be taken into consideration when you look at every manuscript. But Sinaiticus, the story is, Tischendorf was going to, all the Greek Orthodox guys at Mount Sinai were going to burn it, and then he was like, I saved it from the fire. But you wouldn't burn a manuscript like that anyway; it wouldn't burn well. And so it's just a story, he made up, obviously. But anyway, let's continue.
He's a scholar, and he did a lot of early work, FDA-approved work on psychedelics. And he spent 16 years teaching himself to read ancient Hebrew. Okay,
so someone is saying stream suspended for copyright violations. So must be copyright thingy. Why did YouTube delete this? Well, that's not good. Probably a strike because of Rogan. Well, it's usually not these guys. It's usually YouTube. So it looks like the thing's got shut down. Being shut down, sorry. So anyway, I guess I'm talking to myself. Oh, no. Okay, he's back. So yeah, I didn't even know I was cut off. So I might check on my phone and see what the go is. Oh yeah, due to a copyright match. Here we go. Live stream copyright notice. Your stream was interrupted. Where's Huff on Joe Rogan? Due to a copyright match, your stream was interrupted. Where's Huff on Joe Rogan by Nick Sayers. Streams are interrupted when copyright content is detected. After copyright material is no longer being streamed, streams are automatically re-enabled. Okay, well, I'll just check that one out. Okay. One, two. Okay. Yeah. So that's still live. There's 20 watching me now. So I guess they've sort of realized that half the rest of the internet are going through this same podcast, and they're like, "Oh, whoops!" Did anyone see the Facebook Mark Zuckerberg where he said, "Well, I want to be like X. You know, sorry for having all these." Fact checkers and all the rest of it, like as if he hasn't been right behind all that and pushed all that sort of stuff. But I was like, oh, well, if it's, regardless of motives and intentions and all the rest of it, hopefully it'll be more freedom of speech and you can say whatever you want. Because, it seems like society has had a huge correction there and people are just saying whatever they want nowadays. I'm finding that most people I meet are just saying outlandish things. I'm like, wow, you sort of get, looked at funny if you're pharmaceutical companies or vaccines or, you said something positive about, the Republican Party or, people are just saying whatever they want now. And it's like, okay, it's really strange. The whole X thing's pretty interesting. But so I don't know where it got cut off. Hilly says, wow, I got cut off once and you immediately, everything went black. Nothing changed. I was watching through this. And so maybe they're realizing, maybe I was just showing clips that were a little bit too long because some of this to me is sort of like, okay, or they're talking about, this, copper scroll and treasure. And it's like, I'm sort of inside, I'm yawning a little bit because it's not really, what I want to talk about, but I'm sort of just going through that. But yeah, so I'm back live. Titus says Rogan's people probably allowed it. I think it's just the algorithms. Like I've had copyrighted stuff. Like straight away, they're like, this is a song, it's copyrighted, you can't have this. Or there you go, that's fine, it's copyrighted, but you're allowed to use this one or whatever. And so I think that's what they did. They're like, this comes under fair use. And, in Australia, like fair use is, it's obviously it's a YouTube thing that we're allowed to critique, So anyway, I'm just make small talk as you play the clips. Yeah, I think I've got to, because I know there's this one guy, he does music reaction videos, and he said, or he actually fades everything. And when he plays the music, he says if he plays it like all the way through, he gets a copyright hit. But if he just talks, and so he'll just cut it off and just sort of waffle on a little bit. But I'm trying not to do that, but I guess I sort of have to, But anyway, it's almost been like 3 hours and it's 12:30 at night here. And so I was probably going to shut it down anyway pretty soon. And so it's probably a good point to go, okay, well, let's shut it down. So I think I might do that while we're in the mode of going, shut down. I know people have thought it's like a resurrection. It's pretty exciting that I'm back, but I'll be back I'll be back another time, and we went for nearly 40 minutes of this, so it goes for 3 hours and 15. There are some long periods in this that I found sort of went, in the middle of nowhere, and I guess that comes down to Joe sort of obviously he's limited on this particular topic, so he's sort of trying to liken it to this other thing and talk about Egypt and all the rest of it, and it's fascinating, but it's sort of like not much to do with what usually is taught. So I think I'll stop it there, guys. And yeah, we'll see each other again. Now, if you guys are still hearing me or seeing me, just maybe if someone can just say yes in the comment, that'd be great. Because I'm not sure if it's the copyright thing. Oh yeah, so yeah, see you, brother. Yep, cool. So people are still seeing it. Shall Stand Forever says, I'll be very honest, before a week ago I had no idea who Wes Huff was, and I followed the textual critics from a distance, of course, but here I am, just curious about all this. Yes, and so I think one of the things is Wes Huff is more an apologist, and he's dabbling into the whole issue of text criticism, pretty much doing what James White, it's almost like he's a student of James White or something, like P52, this whole thing. It's like he gives one to Joe Rogan, that he's cut out and done his craft and all that. But yeah, anyway, thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you. I'll play my fancy little outro, and we'll see you guys next time.